Imagine this. You're standing at the edge of a wide, slow-moving river. The air is thick with tension. Your breath catches in your throat. A crocodile has taken your child, and it now floats before you unmoving, its eyes ancient and unreadable. Then it speaks. "I will return your child," the creature says, "but only if you can correctly guess what I will do next." At that moment, the world halts. Time seems to stop. This is no longer a simple matter of life or death. This is something deeper, something older. You've entered a riddle, a logical snare wrapped in the illusion of choice. You begin to understand that no matter what you say, you're walking into a paradox. This disturbing thought experiment, known as the Crocodile Paradox, has puzzled philosophers for centuries. On the surface, it's just a strange puzzle involving a child, a predator, and a promise. But beneath the surface, it becomes a terrifying reflection on the nature of logic, the power of language, and the unseen traps laid by those who create the rules. Let's break it apart. There are only two answers you can give the crocodile, two possible guesses about what it will do next. In the first scenario, you say, "You will return my child." If that is indeed what the crocodile intended, then your prediction is correct, and by its own promise, the child must be returned. No contradiction. All is in order. Logic holds. Justice, perhaps, is served. But if the crocodile was planning to keep your child, your prediction is incorrect. So the creature is not bound to return them. Once again, all seems consistent. The promise works. But now the second scenario. You say, "You will not return my child." If the crocodile was planning to keep the child, then your prediction is correct. And that means the crocodile must return your child because you guessed correctly. But in doing so, it violates its plan to keep the child. So it can't follow through. But if the crocodile was planning to return your child, then your prediction is incorrect, and therefore the promise should be void. Yet returning the child would then be a contradiction. Here, logic collapses. The promise folds in on itself. No matter what the crocodile does, it breaks the condition of its own words. You're not just dealing with a beast. You're grappling with a self-consuming paradox. This is the essence of the Crocodile Paradox. It's not just about a deal or a guessing game. It's a mirror held up to the limitations of reason itself. It belongs to a class of puzzles called self-referential paradoxes, circular logic traps that defy resolution. Think of the famous statement, "This sentence is false." If the sentence is true, then it must be false. But if it's false, then it must be true. Like a snake devouring its own tail, logic spirals into contradiction. Now ask yourself, is a promise still a promise if it cannot be fulfilled under its own rules? What good is a condition that invalidates itself the moment it's tested? These are not just idle philosophical games. They echo through the real world, in contracts with built-in loopholes, in legal frameworks that contradict themselves, in systems where power is preserved through impossible conditions. And so the crocodile becomes more than a creature. It becomes a symbol of authority that crafts rules designed to fail, a figure that offers choices where none truly exist, a trap that ensures no matter what path you take, you lose. And here lies the most disturbing truth. The crocodile is not breaking the rules. It is obeying them flawlessly because it created them. So what's the point of such a paradox? Can it ever be resolved? Should we even try? Most philosophers agree. The crocodile paradox is not meant to be solved. It exists to illustrate a boundary, a limit where logic, language, and expectation collapse into uncertainty. It is a puzzle not of solution, but of recognition, because once you see it for what it is, a carefully designed contradiction, you begin to understand that sometimes the rules themselves are the illusion. Sometimes the wisest move isn't to answer, but to step away from the game altogether. So, if one day you find yourself standing by that river with a crocodile offering you an impossible deal, remember this: the trap was never in the answer you gave. The trap was the question itself, and your only freedom may be in knowing the game was rigged before it ever began. Have you ever looked around and quietly wondered why your friends seem to have more friends than you? You're not imagining it. It's not insecurity. It's not self-doubt. It's a real, measurable phenomenon, and it has a name. It's called the Friendship Paradox, a strange, unsettling truth discovered by sociologists and mathematicians alike. At its core, it states something simple but jarring. On average, your friends are more popular than you. But how can this be? Let's begin with the structure of connection itself. Imagine every person in the world as a dot, a point on a vast map. Now imagine lines stretching between them. Friendships, relationships, bonds of familiarity. Some people have just a few lines. Others, they're glowing hubs, with hundreds of connections reaching out like a spider's web. Here lies the trick. People with more friends are more likely to be in your social circle, not because you're drawn to them intentionally, but because statistically they're everywhere. If someone has 100 friends, they have 100 chances to be your friend. But someone with only 2 friends, just 2 chances. They're less likely to appear in your world, less likely to be the one you see, hear from, or compare yourself to. So when you look around and feel outnumbered, you're not broken. You're observing a mathematical illusion. It's not about your worth. It's about how networks behave. And the deeper you look, the more profound this paradox becomes. Because this isn't just about numbers. It's about perception. And perception, as we know, shapes reality. In the age of digital connection, this paradox explodes. Open your phone. Scroll through your feed. What do you see? Smiling faces, exotic vacations, flashes of achievement, milestones shared and celebrated. But here's the twist. You're mostly seeing content from those who post the most, who interact the most, who are followed the most, those with the most social gravity, the popular ones. And suddenly, the paradox deepens. You feel small, invisible, behind. But that's the illusion. You're not seeing the full story. You're only seeing the loudest rooms in a crowded building. And the silence, the stillness of the people with fewer connections, that's hidden behind the algorithm. So the paradox begins to hurt. It starts to shape how we see ourselves, our worth, our happiness, even our identity. Studies show that constant exposure to these distorted reflections can lead to anxiety, depression, envy, and disconnection. Because we're not just comparing lives, we're comparing our lives to a highlight reel curated by those who naturally appear more often in our circles. But there's more to this paradox than emotional impact. There's utility, there's strategy, there's truth. In public health, scientists have used the Friendship Paradox to identify the most connected individuals in a network. Why? Because targeting the hubs, the ones who influence many, can help stop the spread of disease or accelerate the spread of truth. In these networks, not all connections are equal. A small group holds the power to shape the behavior of the many. But that power comes with distortion, a skewed sense of what's common, what's desirable, and what's real. And the implications reach further still. In business, in politics, in culture. the most connected voices shape the dominant narrative. They seem louder, not always because they're wiser, but because the network places them at the center. And we measure ourselves against them. We assume their world is the norm. But it isn't. It's the exceptions made visible. So what can we learn? First, we must remember this. Networks distort reality. Our minds interpret patterns, but the patterns are biased by visibility, by reach, by design. Your view of what's normal, in friendships, success, even love, is colored by the network itself, and that lens is flawed. Second, we must resist the trap of quantity over quality. The friendship paradox makes us focus on how many, but not how deep. You may not have hundreds of connections, but one genuine friendship, one person who truly sees you, that changes everything. Finally, we must reclaim our perception. Just as light bends through glass, truth bends through connection. And sometimes, to see clearly, we have to step back from the mirror. Because the paradox doesn't define you. It reveals a system, a structure. And once you understand the trick, you no longer fall for it. So next time you feel left behind, less loved, less seen, pause, breathe, and remind yourself that the most valuable relationships are rarely the most visible. And the people who matter most, they're not the ones with the most likes. They're the ones who show up, quietly, consistently, truthfully. And no paradox can ever replace that. In the heart of every open society, there lies a question too heavy for comfort and too important to ignore. Can a truly tolerant society survive if it tolerates the intolerant? This is not just a thought experiment. It's a warning, a philosophical alarm first sounded by the great thinker Karl Popper in the aftermath of the world's darkest wars. He called it the Tolerance Paradox. At first, the idea seems simple. Live and let live. Accept all views. Allow freedom of speech, of belief, of action. Build a world where difference is not feared, but welcomed. But what happens when one of those differences is the belief that no one else should be different? What happens when an ideology, masked in the language of liberty, rises up to deny liberty to others? That is the seed of the paradox. And if left unchecked, it grows into something far more dangerous than disagreement. It grows into destruction. Let us imagine a peaceful society, one built on freedom, where people speak their minds, worship how they wish, live without fear of persecution. Then, an intolerant belief system takes root, a system that seeks not dialogue, but domination. It spreads, loud, charismatic, appealing to fear, grievance, nostalgia. At first, the tolerant majority shrugs it off. We must let them speak. Everyone has a right to their voice. But what happens when those voices begin to silence others? What happens when hate marches under the banner of free speech? Now, the tolerant society faces a choice. Tolerate intolerance and risk its own collapse, or reject intolerance and risk betraying its own principles. That is the cruel beauty of the paradox. Popper's answer was sharp, clear, necessary. A tolerant society must be intolerant of intolerance, not because it wishes to silence opposition, but because it seeks to preserve the space where opposition can even exist. This isn't about stifling dissent. It's about drawing a boundary, a line in the sand where freedom ends and tyranny begins. Because if every voice is sacred, then the voice that seeks to destroy all others must be the exception. Still, this solution raises discomfort, and rightly so. How do we distinguish between mere disagreement and dangerous ideology. Who decides where the line is drawn? Is a strong opinion an act of intolerance? Or does true intolerance begin when words turn into action, when belief becomes suppression? These are not easy questions, and the answers can shift with time, context, and power. History is filled with societies that misunderstood this balance, democracies that tolerated tyrants, until those tyrants dismantled the very democracy that gave them power. Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, authoritarian regimes that once rose peacefully through the doors of freedom, only to slam them shut behind them. This is not ancient history. This is our inheritance. The Tolerance Paradox teaches us that freedom is not self-sustaining. It must be guarded, not with violence, but with vigilance. It forces us to ask, can we stop a fire without burning the forest? In modern times, the paradox plays out in digital spaces, political debates, college campuses, and city streets. Should we allow hate speech in the name of free speech? Should platforms amplify voices that preach division for the sake of balance? Or should a line be drawn? Some argue, let all speech flourish. Truth will out. Falsehoods will fall. Others reply, falsehoods don't fall. They multiply. And if left alone, they drown the truth in noise. We also face a deeper human truth. Intolerance thrives on fear, on disconnection, on the illusion of threat. It is easier to hate what we do not know, and harder to hate what we take the time to understand. And so, one solution lies in education, in empathy, in building bridges before walls are ever erected. But here too, the paradox persists. What do you do with those who reject bridges? Who build walls intentionally? Who view empathy as weakness? Dialogue can only function when both sides respect its rules. When one side uses freedom to destroy the very space that makes freedom possible, then tolerance must not be passive. It must act firmly, wisely, and with purpose. Popper never claimed this would be easy. He only insisted that it was necessary. Because the alternative, a society so open that it cannot defend itself, is not noble, it is doomed. So, what is the lesson of the tolerance paradox? First, tolerance is not limitless. It is bounded by the need to protect the very framework that makes it possible. Second, freedom requires judgment. Not all ideas are equal, and not all intentions deserve the same platform. Third, a tolerant society must be courageous. It must confront what threatens its soul, even when that threat wears the mask of free expression. But above all, the paradox reminds us that tolerance is not weakness. It is a strength born of restraint, of principle, of moral clarity. To defend tolerance is to protect the fragile miracle of peaceful coexistence. It is to say, you may disagree, you may challenge, you may speak your truth, but the moment you deny others that right, you forfeit your place at the table. That is not intolerance. That is the price of peace, and it is a price we must be willing to pay. Picture this. You walk into an ice cream shop. You're craving something sweet. You're ready to indulge. But instead of 6 familiar flavors, you're greeted with 50: chocolate, vanilla, strawberry, salted caramel, mango sorbet, rocky road, and dozens more, swirling with toppings, textures, and names you've never heard before. At first it feels exciting. The abundance, the freedom, so many options. Surely one of them will be perfect. But then, doubt creeps in. What if you pick pistachio and regret not choosing the toasted coconut fudge? What if the rocky road would have made your day? You stand there, frozen, not by the ice cream but by the weight of possibility. This is not a dessert dilemma. This is the paradox of choice, a profound insight into the human mind, revealed by psychologist Barry Schwartz. He proposed a striking idea. More choice does not always lead to more happiness. In fact, the opposite may be true, because when options multiply, so do expectations. So does anxiety. And so does regret. Let's return to that shop. After minutes of internal debate, you finally choose salted caramel, but as you take the first bite, your mind wanders. Should I have chosen the hazelnut swirl? Did I miss something better? Even if the salted caramel is wonderful, your enjoyment is tainted by the fear of missing out. This is called post-decision regret, and it doesn't just apply to dessert. It follows us through everything. Jobs, partners, clothes, travel, careers, beliefs. And it all begins with one quiet pressure: the opportunity cost. Every time we say yes to something, we are saying no to everything else. When choices are few, that cost is small. But when choices are endless, we become haunted by the ghosts of every door we didn't walk through. And so, the more we're given, the less we enjoy what we choose. Not because our choices are bad, but because they weren't perfect. And in a world obsessed with perfection, good enough feels like failure. Another twist to this paradox lies in expectation. When you have only 3 options, you adjust your standards. You're grateful for what's available. But when you have 50, you expect greatness, the best flavor, the best profit, the best result. So, when your experience is merely good, it feels like a disappointment, because you didn't just choose one thing. You also chose to abandon 49 others. That gap between what is and what could have been is where discontent begins. Some people suffer from this more than others. Maximizers are those who want the best of everything. They'll read every review, watch every comparison video, ask for every recommendation until they find the perfect option. But this pursuit of perfection often leads to stress, fatigue, and disappointment, because perfection is an illusion, and the search for it never ends. On the other hand, satisficers aim for what's simply good enough. They make a decision, stick with it, and move on. Ironically, this makes them happier, because they don't dwell on what they didn't choose. They embrace the moment instead of chasing the impossible. In today's world, the paradox of choice has never been more visible. What to eat, what to watch, what to wear, who to follow, who to date, what to believe. It's all a scroll away, and with every swipe, our brain absorbs new possibilities and new doubts. We think freedom lies in endless opportunity, but in reality, it often leads to decision fatigue, a state of mental exhaustion where even small decisions become overwhelming. So, how do we escape? First, we simplify. Limit the number of options you consider. Create personal rules or boundaries. Instead of browsing 100 restaurants, choose from the top 5 nearby. Instead of scanning 40 streaming titles, watch the next unseen film on your list. Less time debating, more time living. Second, we reframe our mindset. Choose to believe that good enough can still be wonderful, because perfection isn't where joy lives. Gratitude is. Third, we let go. Let go of the idea that every decision must be optimized, that every moment must be extraordinary, that life is a test with a single right answer. It's not. The beauty of life is not found in picking the perfect thing, but in fully experiencing whatever you choose. The paradox of choice also offers a deeper spiritual lesson. Happiness doesn't come from limitless doors. It comes from walking through one with presence, purpose, and peace. Because when you're always looking back, wondering what might have been, you miss what is. In the end, This paradox is not a flaw of modern life. It is a mirror, a reflection of our craving for control, certainty, and more. But sometimes less is more, and clarity is more precious than variety. So next time you feel lost in a sea of choice, pause, pick one, and then choose to be at peace with it, because that, in a world of endless options, is the most powerful choice of all. Why is it that something as vital as water, the very essence of life, is cheap or even free, while a diamond, beautiful yet unnecessary, commands a fortune? This is the value paradox, also known as the diamond water paradox, and it challenges everything we assume about worth, utility, and what we truly value. It was first posed by Adam Smith, the father of modern economics, a paradox that's puzzled minds for centuries, because on the surface, it makes no sense. Water is life. It quenches thirst, grows our food, cleans our bodies, sustains our ecosystems. Without it, civilization crumbles, humanity ends. Diamonds, on the other hand, they sparkle. They symbolize wealth, love, or status. But you could live your entire life without ever touching one. So why then do we treat the essential as worthless and the non-essential as priceless? The answer lies in two types of value: utility value and exchange value. Utility value is simple. It's the usefulness of something, how necessary it is, how much it satisfies a real need. By that measure, water should be priceless. Exchange value, however, is what something can be traded for, what it's worth in a market. And here's the twist. Water, despite being crucial, has a low exchange value because it's often abundant. Diamonds, though nearly useless for survival, are scarce, and scarcity changes everything. We don't always value things for how useful they are. We value them for how rare, how exclusive, how difficult they are to obtain. This is where marginal utility comes in, a concept that reveals how value is not fixed, but shaped by context. Imagine this. You're lost in the desert, parched, weak. One cup of water saves your life. In that moment, it's beyond price. But at home, with clean water pouring endlessly from the tap, that same glass makes little. The more we have of something, the less each additional unit is worth. This is marginal utility. And diamonds? They're rare by design. Not everyone can have one. And because they're scarce, their marginal utility remains high. It's not about how much we need them. It's about how hard they are to get, and how much others are willing to pay just to have something others can't. The value paradox teaches us this. Value is not based on need. It is based on perceived worth in a particular context. Markets don't operate on absolute truths. They operate on subjective perception. And perception is a fragile thing. People don't always pay for what's most important. They pay for what they think will make them feel powerful, admired, successful, or safe. That's why luxury handbags, designer shoes, or cryptocurrency tokens can fetch outrageous prices, while clean water, fresh air, or kindness go unnoticed. The paradox reveals more than an economic truth. It exposes the psychology of desire, our tendency to overlook the essential when it's common, and to chase the useless when it's rare. But the paradox also has real consequences. Consider water again. In developed nations, it flows freely, so we waste it, pollute it, take it for granted. But in drought-stricken regions, clean water becomes a treasure. It is bought, sold, fought over. What was once worthless now becomes life or death. The fragility of abundance. That's what the paradox reveals. And it reminds us that value is not permanent, it changes. With time, with access, with need. On a deeper level, the value paradox invites us to question our priorities. What do we treasure? What do we pursue? Are we building lives around symbols of value, or around things that actually sustain us? Diamonds symbolize forever, but water keeps us alive today. We chase wealth, but overlook rest. We pursue admiration, but neglect health. We seek more, while forgetting what we already have. Economics might explain the paradox through supply and demand. Water is abundant, so it's cheap. Diamonds are rare, so they're expensive. But philosophy takes us deeper. It asks, why do we assign value the way we do? Why do we reward the spectacular and ignore the simple? Why do we praise what glitters and disregard what gives life? Ultimately, the value paradox teaches us this. What we value reflects who we are. It reveals the culture we live in, the stories we believe, and the fears we carry. And perhaps its greatest lesson is this. That value is not found in things. It's found in how we see them. What is rare to one person is essential to another. What is worthless today may be priceless tomorrow. So ask yourself, what do you value most? And what have you taken for granted? Because one day what seems cheap may become the thing you need most of all. Imagine this. You're praised all your life for being frugal. You save your money. You avoid debt. You make responsible choice. And yet, economists say you might be hurting the economy. How can that be? This is the paradox of thrift, a startling economic truth that flips everything we thought we knew about saving. Because sometimes what's good for you can be harmful to everyone else. It begins with a simple idea. Saving money is nuts. It builds security. It prepares you for emergencies. It offers freedom in the long run. But in the grand machine of a functioning economy, your saving is someone else's lost income. When you choose not to spend, businesses earn less. When businesses earn less, they cut costs. Layoffs begin. Hiring slows. Production shrinks. And what started as responsible behavior turns into a nationwide contraction. This is the paradox. The more we save during a downturn, the more we damage the economy we depend on. Let's zoom in. Picture a small town. Families, worried about the future, decide to cut back. They stop going out to eat, skip the vacation, cancel their gym memberships, delay buying new clothes or electronics. All reasonable, right? But local restaurants begin to struggle. The travel agency sees no bookings. The clothing boutique goes weeks without sales. One by one, businesses lay off staff. Income dries up, and fire spreads like wildfire. Suddenly, the town is not saving. It's spiraling. The paradox of thrift was popularized by economist John Maynard Keynes during the Great Depression. He saw that when everyone saves at once, demand collapses, and when demand collapses, businesses die. Jobs disappear, and the very people trying to protect their future end up making it worse for everyone, including themselves. Keynes argued that in moments like these, spending, not saving, is what saves the economy. That might feel counterintuitive, but consider this. If people spend, businesses survive. Workers keep their jobs. Confidence returns. And that confidence, it becomes fuel for recovery. Now, this doesn't mean saving isn't always bad. In normal times, saving is the backbone of investment. Your money in the bank becomes a loan to someone building a house, starting a company, or inventing something new. But in a crisis, when fear takes over and everyone hoards what little they have, the flow of money freezes, and economies like rivers only thrive when they move. This is why governments often step in when a recession hits. If families stop spending and businesses pull back, someone has to keep the economy alive, and that someone is often the state. Through public projects, roads, schools, hospitals, governments inject money into the system. They hire, they build, they pay, and they restore the current of confidence. This idea, Keynesian economics, has shaped decades of policy. But it's not without controversy. Some argue that encouraging spending in tough times leads to reckless debt for both families and nations. Others believe that forced austerity, cutting back on government spending, can choke the recovery before it even starts. And beneath the debate lies something deeper, the emotional engine of the economy. Because money isn't just numbers on a screen. It's hope, fear, trust, and belief. In uncertain times, people cling to what they have. They save, not from logic, but from instinct. From survival, this emotional reflex to retreat, protect, hold back, can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. When confidence falls, so does spending. When spending falls, businesses shrink. When businesses shrink, jobs vanish, and the cycle begins again. So, what can we take from the paradox of thrift? First, it teaches us to see the whole picture. That economics isn't just about your wallet. It's about interconnection. Your choices ripple outward. They touch neighbors, workers, families, and strangers. Second, it reminds us of the power of balance. Saving is vital, spending is vital, and knowing when to do each is the key to economic stability. Third, it reveals that individual choices, no matter how well-intentioned, can clash with the needs of the collective. You may be acting wisely, but if everyone does the same, the outcome may be disastrous. And finally, it challenges us to rethink responsibility. We often praise self-sufficiency, but sometimes the most responsible thing you can do is spend with purpose. Support a small business, invest in your community, circulate trust in the form of dollars, because a healthy economy isn't built on fear, it's built on connection and the confidence to move forward together. The paradox of thrift reminds us that no one acts in isolation. Our fears become each other's burdens, and our courage can become each other's salvation. There's something haunting about the idea that the more you try to make the world safe, the more dangerous it becomes. It sounds backward, doesn't it? But this is the unsettling truth behind what political scientists call the Stability-Instability Paradox, a theory that challenges everything we think we know about power, security, and the fragile dance between peace and war. It began in the Cold War era, a time when the planet was locked in a tense standoff between two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. Both had nuclear arsenals capable of ending all life on Earth. And this terrifying truth gave rise to an ironic kind of peace, a concept called mutually assured destruction. Neither side could win, so neither side dared to start. At the global level, this was stability. Peace, not through harmony, but through the fear of annihilation. But then came the paradox. Because while this balance prevented full-scale war, it made smaller wars more likely. Why? Because if both superpowers knew that nuclear weapons were off the table, they were freer to engage in limited conflicts. They backed opposing sides in Vietnam, Korea, Afghanistan, each a bloody echo of the greater war that could never be fought directly. This is the paradox. Global peace created a war. Stability at the top bred instability below. It all comes down to incentives. When big players believe that a massive escalation is unlikely, they may feel safe enough to engage in lower-level hostilities. Skirmishes, proxy wars, covert operations, cyber attacks, they all become tempting. After all, if there's no risk of triggering all-out destruction, why not push the boundaries? But the paradox doesn't end with the Cold War. It lives on, quietly shaping the conflicts of our time. Consider the nuclear tension between India and Pakistan. Both are armed. Both understand the catastrophic consequences of nuclear war, and yet they've clashed repeatedly in border skirmishes, airstrikes, and nationalist provocations. The logic remains the same. Because full-scale war is too dangerous, smaller conflicts feel safer. But they're not. They're just more frequent and often more unpredictable. The Stability-Instability Paradox isn't limited to the battlefield either. Its logic applies to cybersecurity, economics, even artificial intelligence. In cybersecurity, as governments build stronger digital defense, attackers become more creative. Hackers push harder. State-sponsored threats evolve. Stronger walls provoke smarter weapons. In economics, financial regulations meant to stabilize markets can sometimes create the illusion of safety, encouraging riskier behavior that leads to financial bubbles, bank failures, or debt crises. And in AI development, some believe that powerful safety systems may ironically embolden developers to build more dangerous systems, trusting that the safeguards will always hold. The paradox strikes again. Every attempt to increase stability can sow the seeds of future instability. So how do we navigate this? How do we pursue peace without triggering the very conflicts we seek to avoid? The answer, if there is one, begins with humility. Because the world is not a machine. It's not something you can simply fix or program. It's a living system. Dynamic, unpredictable, shaped by fear, pride, history, and emotion. Each policy, each treaty, each technological innovation creates ripples far beyond its intended effect. That's why the Stability-Instability Paradox is more than a political theory. It's a mirror held up to the human condition. We crave control, we seek safety, but in doing so, we often create new dangers we never saw coming. That's why communication and trust are so essential, especially between rivals. When nations understand each other's intentions, they're less likely to act out of fear, less likely to misinterpret silence as a threat, or strength as aggression. History has shown what happens when misunderstandings collide with weapons. The paradox teaches us that peace is not passive. It must be maintained, monitored, adjusted. It's not a destination. It's a balance. And that balance is always shifting, because even in moments of apparent calm, the forces of instability may be gathering, quietly, invisibly, beneath the surface. So, what can we take from this? First, that stability is not always a blessing. Sometimes it can mask deeper tensions. Second, that systems are interconnected. A change in one part, military, digital, economic, can spark unrest in another. And third, that our pursuit of security must be not built on fear alone, but on understanding, adaptability, and a willingness to see complexity where others see control. Because perhaps the deepest lesson of the Stability-Instability Paradox is this: the road to conflict is often paved with good intentions, with plans to keep peace, with walls meant to protect, with rules meant to preserve order. But every lock creates a key. Every system invites resistance, and every shield can become a weapon in the hands of someone willing to test it. So let us not cling too tightly to the illusion of absolute safety. Let us instead stay curious, stay honest, and remember, true peace is not the absence of war. It is the ongoing courage to question what keeps us safe and what makes us blind. What if happiness, true, lasting happiness, slips further away the more you reach for it? This isn't just poetic melancholy. It's a real psychological and philosophical riddle known as the Hedonism Paradox. A strange and haunting truth. The more we chase pleasure, the more it retreats. It sounds cruel, even unfair, but buried within it is a powerful message, one that questions everything we think we know about calm, fulfillment, and the very meaning of life. At first glance, the logic of hedonism feels simple. It's the idea that pleasure is the highest good, the ultimate aim of existence. And why not? Isn't life, at its most vibrant, about beauty, love, music, laughter, comfort? From an afternoon in the sun to a quiet moment with someone we love, pleasure is one of the few constants we can all recognize. The hedonist would say, maximize these moments, pursue them. Fill your days with as much joy as possible. But here's where the paradox begins, because when you set pleasure itself as your end goal, you may find it slipping through your fingers like sand you clutch too tightly. Imagine walking into a party determined to have the time of your life. You plan the outfit. You visualize the laughs, the music, the conversations. But as the night unfolds, you become hyper-aware. Is this fun enough? Am I smiling enough? Am I enjoying myself as much as they are? And slowly, what should have been spontaneous becomes strained. The harder you try, the more joy escapes you. This is the hedonism paradox in motion. Not because pleasure is wrong, but because the more you focus on being happy, the less likely you are to feel it. Psychologists call this the paradoxical effect. When you obsess over an outcome like happiness, you become self-conscious. You begin measuring every moment, and that very act of measuring pulls you out of the experience itself. Because happiness, it turns out, isn't something you can trap or tally. It's something that arises indirectly, as a consequence of living meaningfully. As Viktor Frankl once wrote, happiness cannot be pursued. It must ensue. He would know. A Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, Frankl learned that even in darkness, joy could arise. Not from chasing pleasure, but from living with purpose, with conviction, with love. Modern research agrees. In positive psychology, people who focus on intrinsic goals, like personal growth, connection, creativity, report far higher satisfaction than those who chase external validation. Money, status, appearance. The paradox teaches us that joy is often the byproduct of doing something we love, not the reward for obsessing over how we feel. Think of a child at play. They don't stop mid-laugh to ask, "Am I having enough fun?" They're simply absorbed, flowing, alive. That is where real happiness hides. Now compare this to the culture we live in. A culture that whispers, no, shouts, that happiness is a product, something you can buy, wear, photograph, or post. We're told the right car, the perfect vacation, the newest phone will finally make us feel fulfilled. But these promises are illusions. They hook us into a cycle of craving, a life of never quite arriving. Social media fuels this even further. We scroll through highlight reels of others' lives, the smiling faces, the sunset beaches, the perfect homes. And we wonder, why don't I feel like that? But the truth is, you're comparing your internal world to their curated performance. And when you measure yourself by that mirage, you forget your own depth. The Hedonism Paradox tells us, don't chase what cannot be caught. Instead, immerse yourself in the act of living. Do things that matter to you. Create, connect, explore, love, without needing a reason why. Paradoxically, the less you chase happiness, the more it begins to appear. Quietly, subtly, in the moments you least expect. Like in the rhythm of a song you forgot you loved, in the way sunlight hits your coffee, in the softness of someone's voice saying, "I'm proud of you." Happiness sneaks in when you're not looking for it. So how do we escape the trap? One way is to set goals that reflect your values, not what others admire, but what nourishes you. Another path is mindfulness. Being present, noticing, letting moments unfold without labeling them happy or unhappy. And a third is perhaps the hardest, accepting the full range of being human. Because life isn't always joyful. It's also sadness, boredom, loss, doubt. But when we stop resisting those parts, when we welcome them as part of the whole, something shifts. We become whole. And in wholeness, joy finds room to return. So remember this: pleasure is not the problem. Fixation is. Stop chasing the glow and start lighting candles where you stand. Let happiness arrive when it's ready, not because you hunted it down, but because you lived fully enough to invite it in. In the end, the Hedonism Paradox is not a warning. It's a whisper. Let go of the chase. Live deeply, and happiness will find its way back to you. Is a single grain of sand a heap? Of course not. 2 grains? Still no. But what if you keep adding, 1 grain at a time? At what point does it finally become a heap? Where's the dividing line? When does not a heap silently transform into heap? This question, simple on the surface, leads us into the strange and slippery logic of the Sorites Paradox. The term Sorites comes from the Greek word soros, meaning heap. And at first glance it feels like a silly puzzle. Why argue over something so obvious? You just know when you see a heap. You feel it. But do you really? The problem begins when you try to pin it down. If a 1 grain isn't a heap, and adding just 1 more doesn't suddenly make it 1, then it follows, logically, that no matter how many grains you add, you still never reach a heap. But that can't be right. At some point, a pile of sand is definitely a heap. You've seen it. So how can something exist in the world, so clearly visible, so widely understood, yet completely collapse when you try to define it precisely? That's the brilliance of the Sorites Paradox. It's not just about sand. It's about vagueness. It's about how we define anything that lives on a spectrum, rather than in categories. Think about baldness. At what number of lost hairs is someone bald? 10, 100, 1,000. Or wealth? How many dollars separate the poor from the rich? What's the agink threshold? These aren't trivial matters. They reveal something profound about how language works and where it breaks. Words like heap, tall, old, smart, or kind are useful because they let us speak in general terms, but they don't come with built-in boundaries. They blur. The Sorites Paradox exposes that blur. It takes something soft and familiar and turns it into a sharp philosophical knife. You try to draw a line, and it vanishes under your logic. You try to define a threshold, and the paradox gently pulls it away. One way philosophers have tried to address this is by introducing degrees. Instead of thinking in absolutes, heap or not a heap, they suggest thinking in gradual shifts. Perhaps the more grains there are, the more likely we are to call it a heap. It's not a yes or no, but a spectrum. But then the question becomes, where does that spectrum begin? And who decides where to place the transition? Even with probabilities or fuzzy logic, we're still left in the fog. Even with numbers and models, vagueness clings to the edges. Another approach is contextualism. What counts as a heap depends on the situation. A pile of 50 grains on a dining table might be seen as a heap, but the same pile on a beach, it disappears. So maybe definitions change depending on use, on need, on scale. That helps. But it also opens the door to endless variability. The paradox goes even deeper. It doesn't just challenge how we define things. It affects how we live, how we judge, and how we decide. In law, for instance, we rely on vague terms all the time. Reasonable doubt, excessive force, intent. We need flexibility in those definitions because every case is different. But that same flexibility leaves room for misinterpretation, disagreement, and injustice. In the ethics too, when does inequality become too much? At what point does a rising global temperature become a crisis? These are not semantic puzzles. They are the very heart of modern dilemmas. And the Sorites Paradox sits there, quietly complicating every attempt to find a clear answer. It teaches us something vital, something we often forget. The world doesn't always offer sharp lines. Our brains crave categories. We want to label and separate. This is a heap. That is not. This is a child. That is an adult. This is poor. That is rich. But reality doesn't work that way. It drifts, it shifts, it flows. The Sorites Paradox forces us to confront the gray zones of life and accept that some truths are met. Maybe the point of the paradox isn't to find an answer. Maybe it's to soften our grip on the illusion of clarity, because sometimes the attempt to define something reveals not its essence, but our own need for simplicity. And maybe, in those moments of uncertainty, we grow wiser. We learn to pause, to consider, to question the edges instead of rushing to conclusions. In that sense, the Sorites Paradox isn't just a challenge. It's an invitation to embrace complexity, to live with ambiguity, to honor the subtle transitions that make life both frustrating and beautifully real. If every single part of a ship is replaced over time, its planks, its sails, its rudder, its wheel, until none of the original material is remaining, can we still call it the same ship? This is the riddle of the ship of Theseus, and it is one of the most enduring paradoxes in all of philosophy. It does more than challenge how we think about objects. It forces us to examine the very essence of identity itself. What defines something as what it is? Is it the material that forms it? The shape it holds? The function it serves? Or is it something more abstract? Something we cannot quite touch, yet still know? Picture a ship resting quietly at a harbor. Time passes. Salt air wears the wood. Weather batters the structure. One day, the crew replaces a damaged plank. A year later, a torn sail. Then another board. Then the mast. Eventually, every single component has been swapped out. Yet the ship still sails, still carries its name, still answers to the stories once told aboard it. So ask yourself this: is it still the same ship? And if not, when did it become something else? Was it after the first piece was changed? After half the parts were gone? Or only when the final original element disappeared? Now consider a further twist. Imagine that someone collects all the old, discarded parts, the original planks, the tattered canvas, the weathered helm, and uses them to rebuild another ship. Exactly as it was. Now, there are two vessels. One is made entirely from the original materials. The other has been continuously maintained part by part over time. Which one is the real ship of Theseus? The restored original, the one that never stops sailing, or both in some mysterious way? This paradox does not offer easy answers. Instead, it draws us deeper into the mystery of what identity really is. Because the ship of Theseus is not just about ships. It is a metaphor for you, for me, For every living thing that changes yet claims continuity. Your body, for example, is constantly renewing itself. Cells die and regenerate every day. By the time you reach middle age, almost all the cells you were born with have been replaced. So, are you still the same person? And if you are, what makes you so? Is it your memories, your name, your consciousness? Or is it something deeper, something more timeless? And what about the objects around us? If you own a classic car and gradually replace every part, new engine, new tires, new paint, is it still the same car you once cherished? What if someone rebuilt the old one from all its discarded pieces? Which one holds the truth? These questions reveal something fundamental. Our understanding of identity is not as solid as we often assume. Philosophers have wrestled with this for centuries. Some argue that identity lies in continuity of purpose. As long as the ship sails and serves its role, it remains the same ship, regardless of what it's made from. Others say identity is rooted in substance, that the version rebuilt from the original materials is the true ship, because it preserves what once was. And then there is a third idea, one that shifts the entire framework. This view suggests that identity is not one or the other. It is both. It is neither. It is context. It is story. It is a pattern unfolding through time. The ship of Theseus teaches us that identity is not a fixed thing. It is fluid. It evolves. It is shaped as much by perception as by reality. Think about yourself again. Who you were 10 years ago is not who you are today. Your values may have shifted. Your goals may have changed. Your face may show lines where there were once none. Yet something continues. A thread, a rhythm, a silent presence that carries forward through every version of you. This paradox also stretches far beyond the individual. It speaks to cities that rebuild their streets but still feel like home. Languages that lose old words and gain new ones but remain recognizable. Traditions that bend with the times but still carry the soul of generations. It teaches us that to change does not mean to lose. To evolve is not to forget. It is to become over and over again. So how do we resolve the ship of Theseus? We do not. And perhaps we are not meant to. It is not a question to be solved. It is a mirror to reflect how we see the world. It reminds us that identity is not about holding on to the past. It is about honoring what was as while embracing what is becoming. Whether we are speaking of ships, people, cities, or entire cultures, identity is not a destination. It is a journey. A dance between memory and motion, between form and function, between the parts and the whole. And perhaps in that dance we find not a clear answer, but something far more powerful. We find meaning. You need to escape, but the only way to get out is to prove you are insane. Yet the very act of trying to escape is considered rational, which proves you are not insane, and therefore you must stay. This is the heart of the catch-22, a paradox so twisted, so airtight, that no matter how you reason with it, you always end up trapped. It is more than just a frustrating situation. It is a mirror held up to the absurdity of rules, bureaucracies, and systems that seem designed to confuse rather than to serve. The phrase catch-22 comes from Joseph Heller's famous novel, written in 1960. In the book, a World War II bombardier named Josrand wants to stop flying dangerous missions. The rule is simple. A soldier can be grounded if he is proven to be insane. But here comes the twist. If he applies to be grounded, he shows concern for his safety, which is a sane and rational thing to do. And if he doesn't apply, then he keeps flying, despite the danger, which might seem insane, but without a request for exemption, nothing changes. So he's stuck. No matter what he does, he cannot escape the loop. Every exit leads right back to the entrance. This is the trap of the catch-22, a perfect circle of logic that leaves no room for reason. What makes this pattern so powerful is that it feels so real. You've probably lived through a version of it. Try getting a job without experience. You need experience to be hired, but every job requires that you already have it. So where do you begin? Or think about building credit. You need a good credit history to get a loan, but you can't build a credit history without being approved for one in the first place. These aren't just small frustrations. They're loops that quietly crush opportunity, systems that pretend to be fair but are built on contradictions. What makes the catch-22 so insidious is that the logic appears flawless on the surface. It sounds official. It looks reasonable, but it hides a deeper truth, one that serves the system, not the people stuck inside it. In real life, these paradoxes often arise in institutions where rules accumulate faster than sense. Think of government agencies that require you to submit a form you can't access without their approval, or schools that require you to take a class that itself has a prerequisite you can't meet until you take the original class. You go in circles, and each turn feels more pointless than the last. But beneath the surface, Catch-22 reveals something even more unsettling. It shows us how power works. The system defines the rules. Then it uses those rules to prove you can't challenge the system itself. It becomes a closed logic of control. It is not about helping. It is about preserving authority. A bureaucracy, once formed, will protect itself above all else. Even worse, there's practically anyone to blame. No single person is responsible for the trap. You're simply told, that's just how it works. And that sentence alone, delivered with a shrug, can keep a person stuck for years. Philosophically, this raises questions about the role of logic. We like to think logic helps us understand the world, that it offers clarity, that it leads us to fairness. But Catch-22 exposes another truth. That logic, when severed from empathy, can become a cage, a maze that feels deliberate, even when it's accidental. This paradox speaks to the quiet exhaustion of living in a world full of red tape, dead ends, and unanswered emails. It reflects the experience of filling out forms you don't understand, talking to machines instead of people, and getting stuck in a loop of call centers that never transfer you to the right department. But there is something you can do. You may not be able to break the paradox, but you can learn to see it. Step 1. Name it. Recognize when you are trapped in a circular rule. That recognition alone can take away some of its power. Step 2. Look for a side door. Ask different questions. Seek people who understand the system better, or find alternative paths that bypass the contradiction altogether. Step 3. Challenge the system itself. Ask why the rules exist. Push for change, even if it's small. Because Catch-22s thrive in silence. They survive when no one points them out. And step 4. Don't blame yourself. When you're trapped in a paradox, it's easy to feel like you're the problem. But the problem isn't your logic. It's the logic of a system that confuses rule following with intelligence and compliance with value. In the end, Catch-22 is more than a literary device. It is a symbol of the quiet, relentless absurdities we encounter in modern life. It teaches us that not all problems can be solved by following the instructions, that sometimes the only way out is to change the game entirely. And above all, it reminds us that no matter how clever the system, the human spirit still yearns to be free. Imagine a hotel, but not just any hotel. A hotel with an infinite number of rooms. Every room is already occupied, and yet somehow new guests continue to arrive, and the hotel always finds space. This is the Grand Hotel Paradox, a thought experiment introduced by the German mathematician David Hilbert, and it is one of the most beautiful, strange, and mind-warping illustrations of infinity ever conceived. It begins simply enough. Picture the Grand Hotel. Its rooms are numbered in an endless sequence, 1, 2, so 4, and so on, forever. Each room has a guest. There are no vacancies. The hotel is full, completely full. Now imagine a lone traveler walks in from the cold and asks for a room. The receptionist smiles. Of course, they say, we always have space. How? If every room is taken, how can one more person be accommodated? Here's the answer. A trick made possible only by the strange properties of infinity. The receptionist calls every guest and asks them to move to the room one number higher. The guest in room 1 moves to room 2. The guest in room 2 moves to room 3. Room 3 moves to room 4, and so on. Forever. Every person is still inside of the hotel. But now, room 1 is free, and the traveler walks in. A hotel that was already full just made space without evicting a single guest. That's the strange, impossible elegance of infinity. It never runs out. It never says no. There is always room for more. But let's push this paradox further. What if a bus pulls up, and inside that bus is not one person, but an infinite number of new guests? Surely even an infinite hotel must say, I'm sorry, we've reached our limit. But not the Grand Hotel. The receptionist has another trick. This time, they ask each existing guest to move to a room numbered twice their current one. Guest in room 1 goes to room 2. Guest in room 2 moves to room 3 moves to room C. Room 4 moves to room 8. Suddenly, every odd-numbered room is empty. And those are infinite in number too. Room 1, room 3, room 8, room 7. All open, all waiting. The infinite number of new guests step in, each assigned to an odd room. And somehow infinity has welcomed infinity. This is the brilliance of Hilbert's Grand Hotel. It's not just a playful idea. It's a doorway into a deeper world. A world where math and logic collide with imagination and paradox. In our everyday lives, numbers are tidy. They have limits. Rooms are either full or empty. Time is linear. Space is finite. But infinity changes the rules. In this hotel, full doesn't mean full, and adding more doesn't make anything bigger, because there is no edge. There is no end. Hilbert's paradox teaches us that infinity isn't just a really big number. It's a fundamentally different kind of quantity. It laughs at our assumptions, and it invites us to think again. It also forces us to distinguish between two types of infinity. Potential infinity is like counting forever, a process that never ends. Actual infinity is a completed, infinite set, like the total number of rooms in the Grand Hotel. The paradox challenges us because our brains weren't built for this. We are creatures of limits. We understand more and less. But infinity, it lives beyond intuition. It stretches the mind into shapes it rarely takes. And yet, infinity isn't just a mathematical toy. It has consequences. In physics, infinity appears in theories about black holes, the Big Bang, even the nature of time itself. It shows up in questions about the size of the universe, about what lies beyond the edge of reality, and about how the fabric of space might behave when pushed to its extremes. The Grand Hotel Paradox is a lesson in humility. It reminds us that some concepts, though we use them, will always remain slightly out of reach. It also connects to another branch of mathematics, set theory. Through set theory, we learn that not all infinities are equal. The set of whole numbers is infinite, but it is a countable infinity. You can list them one by one. Yet the set of real numbers, which includes fractions, decimals, and irrational numbers, is an even larger infinity, an uncountable infinity. This idea, developed by Georg Cantor, revolutionized how we think about numbers, size, and truth itself. And Hilbert's hotel? It gives those abstractions a story. A hotel hallway where mathematics becomes visual, emotional, and unforgettable. Even in practical fields like computer science, the Grand Hotel finds echoes. Algorithms that process huge datasets must handle infinite processes by breaking them into patterns. Just like shifting hotel guests room by room, the Paradox teaches us how to think in steps when confronted with something boundless. But perhaps its greatest lesson has nothing to do with math. It's this: when something seems impossible, when there's no room, no path forward, no space to expand, there may still be a way, a shift in logic, a new perspective, a rearrangement that changes everything. The Grand Hotel Paradox is more than a mathematical curiosity. It's a reminder that sometimes the universe breaks the rules and invites us to see how vast, how strange, and how beautiful that breaking can be. A cat locked in a box is both alive and dead at the same time. How is that even possible? This is the mind-bending heart of one of the most famous paradoxes in all of physics. Schrödinger's cat, a thought experiment that challenges our deepest assumptions about reality, observation, and the unsettling rules of the quantum world. But don't worry, no cats were harmed in the making of this paradox. It's not a real experiment. It's a philosophical mirror meant to reflect the absurdities hidden within the smallest corners of our universe. The story begins in 1935. Austrian physicist Erwin Schrödinger was grappling with the strange, unsettling implications of a new and mysterious science: quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics is the branch of physics that explores the behavior of particles smaller than atoms: electrons, photons, quarks. At this level, reality behaves nothing like it does in everyday life. It's unpredictable, it's probabilistic, it's weird. To expose this weirdness, Schrödinger invited us to imagine something disturbing. A sealed box, inside it, a living cat, a single radioactive atom, a Geiger counter, and a fragile vial of poison. Here's how the setup works. If the atom decays, the Geiger counter detects it, releases a trigger, and shatters the vial, poisoning the cat. If the atom does not decay, the cat lives. Simple cause and effect. Or is it? Here comes the twist. In the realm of quantum mechanics, before we observe the atom, it exists in a state of superposition. It has both decayed and not decayed. And since the fate of the cat depends on the atom, the cat itself must also be in a superposition, both alive and dead, simultaneously. Until you open the box, until you look, until you observe, that single act, observation, collapses the paradox. The cat becomes either alive or dead. But before that moment, it is somehow both. It sounds absurd, because it is. And that's exactly what Schrödinger wanted. He wasn't proposing this to explain quantum theory. He created the paradox to criticize how bizarre quantum interpretations had become. At the core of this is something known as the Copenhagen interpretation, one of the dominant views in quantum physics. It says that at the quantum level, reality doesn't exist in a fixed state until it is observed. In other words, observation creates reality. But this opens up a flood of troubling questions. What counts as observation? Does it need to be a human observer? Would the Geiger counter itself qualify? Is the universe constantly flickering between possibilities until someone watches? The paradox also pushes into philosophy. What does it mean for something to be two things at once? In daily life, a door is open or closed. A light is on or off. But in the quantum realm, particles can be here and there now and later, spinning up and spinning down, all at once. And Schrödinger's cat forces us to confront this contradiction at a scale we can emotionally understand. A living creature locked between two realities, waiting for an eye to look and decide which one is real. The paradox also highlights a massive gap between the quantum world and the classical world we live in. At the level of electrons, superposition is real. We can measure it in laboratories. But when you zoom out to cats, cars, or planets, things seem much more fixed. This mystery, how quantum weirdness gives rise to everyday order, remains one of the deepest unsolved questions in all of physics. But Schrödinger's cat doesn't end there. There are other interpretations offering radically different views of the problem. Take the many worlds interpretation. It says that when you open the box, the universe splits in two. In one version, the cat lives. In the other, it dies. Both outcomes happen, just in parallel realities. In this view, superposition isn't about dual states in one universe. It's about branching timelines. Every quantum choice splits reality into infinite possibilities. Then there's quantum decoherence, a more grounded explanation. It suggests that the cat isn't truly alive and dead. Instead, interaction with the environment destroys superposition before we can even see it. Our active observation doesn't create reality. It merely reveals what has already been set by subtle interactions we can't perceive. These different interpretations reveal just how mysterious the foundations of physics still are. Schrödinger's cat isn't just a puzzle. It's a doorway into some of the most profound questions humanity has ever asked. And remarkably, this isn't just about theory. Quantum mechanics is the bedrock of much of modern technology. From semiconductors in your phone to quantum computers that use superposition to perform calculations no classical machine can touch. The same bizarre concept that traps a cat in two states is now helping to build the future of computation. In the end, Schrödinger's cat teaches us something humbling, that at the deepest levels of reality, the rules don't make sense, not by our standards. And maybe they never will. Reality may not be one thing or another. It might be both. It might be neither. It might be something that only reveals itself when we dare to look. So, the next time someone tells you it's either this or that, remember, there's a cat in a box, both purring and gone, reminding us that the universe is not so simple. And the deeper we look, the stranger it becomes. The universe is vast, so vast that it holds more galaxies than we can ever count. Hundreds of billions of galaxies, each containing billions of stars, and circling many of those stars, billions more planets. Endless worlds, countless possibilities. With such staggering numbers, it seems inevitable. We are not alone. Surely, somewhere out there, intelligent life must have emerged. Beings who think, wonder, dream. Perhaps far older and far wiser than ourselves. And yet, we hear nothing. No voices across the stars. No signals. No spacecraft. No monuments in space. Only silence. This unsettling contradiction is known as the Fermi Paradox. One of the deepest, most haunting questions humanity has ever asked. If the universe is so big, where is everyone? The name comes from a simple question posed in 1950 by physicist Enrico Fermi. over lunch with colleagues. If there are so many alien civilizations, why haven't we seen any? It was not meant as a joke. It was a riddle, a cosmic whisper echoing through decades of science, philosophy, and imagination. Because the math seems undeniable, even if intelligent life arises on just a tiny fraction of the trillions of planets out there, there should still be millions of advanced civilizations in our galaxy alone. And if just 1% of them developed interstellar travel, they could spread through the Milky Way in a few million years, a blink of time on the scale of the universe. But still, though we see no trace, one possible answer is that we are the exception, that intelligent life is extraordinarily rare. Yes, water and carbon may be common, but the leap from simple cells to conscious minds might be so improbable that it's only happened once, here. If this is true, we're not just rare, we are sacred, the universe's lone mirror reflecting back on itself. Another explanation is distance. Space is vast beyond comprehension. Even at the speed of light, it would take over 100,000 years just to cross our own galaxy. If intelligent civilizations exist, they may simply be too far, their signals still racing toward us from light years away. Or perhaps our tools are still too primitive. Maybe their messages are there, encoded in ways we haven't learned to read, sent on frequencies we haven't yet tuned into. But what if they're close and still choose to remain silent? This is where the zoo hypothesis emerges, the idea that advanced civilizations know we're here, but have chosen not to interfere. Like zookeepers observing a wild species, they watch silently, respectfully, waiting for us to evolve before making contact. It's a comforting idea, and a chilling one, because it implies we are being tested and watched. But there is a darker possibility, that civilizations, once they reach a certain point, do not last. Technological maturity brings immense power and immense risk. Nuclear war, climate collapse, artificial intelligence beyond our control. Perhaps the galaxy is littered with ghosts, ruins, remains of once thriving worlds that destroyed themselves before they could reach it out to others. And maybe we're not far behind. Or maybe we're just blind. We imagine the aliens to look like us, to think like us, to communicate through radio waves or mathematical code. But what if they are nothing like us at all? What if their biology, their senses, their ways of being are so radically different that we wouldn't even recognize them if they were here? Maybe they exist not in space as we understand it, but in dimensions we cannot perceive. Maybe they're all around us, but invisible to human perception. The Fermi Paradox forces us to confront our limitations, to admit that we are infants on the cosmic stage, that our imagination may be too small to grasp the truth. Some say the answer is simple. We haven't been looking long enough. Radio telescopes are recent inventions. Our sky searches span mere decades, a flicker of time compared to the age of stars. In this view, the silence is not a warning, it's a pause, and we must be patient. But others suggest the silence is the message. Perhaps the universe is trying to tell us something, that intelligence burns bright, but dies young. That the cosmos is not a nurturing cradle, but a cold expanse, indifferent to thought or beauty. Or maybe there are rules we do not yet understand, barriers to expansion, laws of nature that prevent civilizations from spreading too far. The Fermi Paradox does not simply ask, where are the aliens? It asks, what does their absence mean for us? Because if we are truly all alone, then we are something more than rare. We are the caretakers of all known intelligence, the stewards of thought, of memory, of meaning. And that comes with a responsibility no civilization has ever faced before. To survive, to grow, to reach out one day, not just to listen for others, but to become the signal that another young world might one day hear. In the end, the Fermi Paradox is not a closed question. It is a door, a haunting, beautiful invitation to wonder, to ask not only where the others are, but who we are, and who we must become if we are the only light in a universe of shadows. A prisoner stands before the judge. His fate has been sealed, but the sentence carries a strange twist. You will be hanged, the judge says, at noon, on one weekday next week. But the exact day will be a surprise. You won't know it's coming until the very moment the executioner arrives. The prisoner is stunned and determined to escape death. He begins to reason. He thinks carefully. He believes he can outsmart the logic. If I'm still alive on Thursday night, he says to himself, then the hanging must be on Friday. But that wouldn't be a surprise. I'd know it's coming. So it can't be Friday, which means it can't be Thursday either, because if Friday is ruled out, then Thursday becomes predictable too. And so he eliminates Wednesday, then Tuesday, then even Monday. One by one, he removes each possibility with cold, calculated logic. By the end, he concludes the judge's promise must be impossible. He believes he has found the flaw, a contradiction in the ruling, a trap in language, and so he sleeps soundly, confident that his reasoning has saved him. But then, on Wednesday at noon, the door creaks open, footsteps echo down the corridor, and the executioner stands before him, rope in hand, sentence to be carried out. The prisoner is shocked, blindsided, completely unprepared. He is hanged, and it is, indeed, a surprise. How could this happen? This is the unexpected hanging paradox, a thought experiment that has bewildered philosophers, logicians, and mathematicians for decades. At first glance, the prisoner's reasoning feels solid. It seems flawless. He used logic, deduction, and the process of elimination to outwit his fate. But something deeper is at play, something unnerving, because the paradox reveals a hidden flaw, not in the judge's sentence, but in the prisoner's own mind. Let's unravel it. The judge made a promise with two conditions. The hanging will happen next week. It will be a surprise. But the prisoner treats these two conditions as if they can be separated. He believes that if he can predict it, it cannot happen. In his efforts to avoid the gallows, he creates a chain of reasoning that feels airtight. But that reasoning depends on the assumption that he can never be wrong. And it's that assumption that becomes his downfall. Because by eliminating every possible day, he convinces himself that the hanging won't happen at all. So when it does happen, on a day he has dismissed, it is a surprise. His very confidence becomes the tool of his undoing. This is the heart of the paradox, self-reference, expectations twisting in on themselves. Just like the liar paradox, this sentence is false. The unexpected hanging ties logic into a knot. It forces us to question how we know what we know. The prisoner thought that by anticipating the outcome, he could prevent it. But in doing so, he ensured it. And the moment his certainty collapsed, the paradox fulfilled itself. Some philosophers argue that the unexpected hanging reveals the limits of logic. That when reasoning tries to fold in on itself to predict unpredictability, it fails. Others see it as a lesson in humility, that no matter how clever we are, no matter how well we plan, surprise can always find a way in. It has also fascinated experts in game theory, where players try to anticipate each other's moves And sometimes the best move is the one that can't be predicted. In this case, the judge wins the game by embedding unpredictability into the rules themselves. There are real-life echoes of this too. In markets, in military strategy, in relationships, and in life. The attempt to control outcomes can sometimes guarantee their opposite. You try so hard to avoid something that you've walked straight into it. And here, the prisoner's final thought before the noose tightens may have been the cruelest irony of all. He never saw it coming, but that was the plan all along. The unexpected hanging paradox forces us to face something deeply unsettling, that our mind may not be built to fully grasp uncertainty. That surprise is not the failure of logic, but a property of reality itself. It reminds us that not everything can be reasoned away, that some outcomes only make sense after they've already happened, and that perhaps in a world as unpredictable as ours, the only certainty is surprise. Imagine a quiet little town with one very peculiar rule. There is only one barber, and this barber has a simple duty. He must shave every man in the town who does not shave himself. But he must never shave any man who does shave himself. It sounds reasonable, clean, mathematically elegant. But then comes the puzzle. Who shaves the barber? At first it seems the answer should be obvious, but the more you think, the more the simplicity dissolves. If the barber shaves himself, then according to the rule, he cannot be shaving himself, because he only shaves those who don't. But if he doesn't shave himself, then he must, because he shaves everyone who doesn't shave themselves. He's trapped. No matter which choice he makes, he breaks the very rule that defines him. This is not just a riddle. It is a doorway, a glimpse into a strange corner of logic where our reason begins to twist in on itself. This is the Barber Paradox, first proposed by Bertrand Russell, the brilliant British philosopher and mathematician. At a glance, it seems like a quirky brain teaser, but beneath the surface lies one of the most important discoveries in the entire history of logic and mathematics. To see how deep the problem runs, you need to understand what's really happening. The rule is self-referential, a system that refers to itself. The barber's shaving law creates two neat categories, those who shave themselves and those who don't. The barber's job is to shave only the second group, but then we try to ask, which group does he belong to? The question breaks the system. Like a mirror reflecting itself endlessly, logic loops back around and collapses. If he's in one group, he must be in the other. And if he's in the other, he must be in the first. No consistent answer can be found without tearing the rule apart. This paradox isn't just about barbers. It's about the limits of language, the boundaries of logic, and the strange things that happen when we try to define something using itself. It's a cousin of another famous thought experiment, the liar paradox. A sentence that says, this sentence is false. If it's true, then it must be false. But if it's false, then it's true. Endless recursion, contradiction, no resolution. Bertrand Russell didn't propose the Barber Paradox as a joke. He used it to highlight a real flaw in the foundations of set theory. At the time, mathematicians believed you could define a set of anything. The set of all epochs, the set of all prime numbers, even the set of all sets. But then Russell asked a dangerous question: what about the set of all the sets that do not contain themselves? If such a set contains itself, then by definition it should not. But if it doesn't contain itself, then by definition it must. This contradiction, now known as Russell's paradox, shook mathematics to its core. It proved that some logical systems can self-destruct if we're not careful about how we define them. The Barber Paradox is simply a friendlier version of this same bombshell. Easier to picture, easier to feel. A man, a rule, and a razor, and yet a door into mathematical crisis. This insight had consequences not just for math, but for philosophy, computer science, linguistics, and even AI. Self-reference, when unchecked, can crash a system, send a program into infinite recursion, cause algorithms to freeze, loop endlessly, or explode with contradiction. It's why we have safety guards in programming, why certain languages avoid self-referencing definitions, why computer logic must be carefully nested to avoid paradox. But the Barber Paradox doesn't only live in equations, it echoes through life. In philosophy, we try to define truth, knowledge, meaning. Often you find the very tools we're trying to examine. It's like trying to see your own eye without a mirror. We describe the mind using the mind. We measure reality with instruments made of reality itself. Self-reference isn't just a bug in logic. It's the mirror in which we try to find ourselves, and sometimes it distorts the reflection. So, what's the solution? In mathematics, Russell's paradox forced a revolution. It led to the development of new set theories that avoid self-referential traps. They place strict rules on how sets can be formed, cutting off the paradox before it can begin. In life, the solution may not be so neat, because self-reference is part of how we think, how we dream, how we define our very identity. The Barber Paradox teaches us that systems must have boundaries, that definitions must have limits, and that sometimes, to escape a contradiction, we must step outside the system itself. It reminds us that reason, powerful as it is not always self-sufficient. Sometimes the problem is the framework, and the only way out is to build a new one, a better one. The barber's razor, it turns out, isn't just for shaving. It's for cutting through illusion. And once you see the edge of that blade, you begin to understand. Even the simplest rules can lead us to the deepest truths. Imagine this. One day you stumble upon a book. Its pages are filled with revolutionary ideas, insights that could change the world. You flip through it in awe, only to discover something strange. The author's name is your own, but you don't remember writing it. In fact, you're certain you haven't. Not yet. Now picture this. Years later, you invent a time machine. You travel back, carrying that same book, and hand it to your younger self. The younger version of you reads it, cites it, and eventually writes it. So, here's the question: where did the book come from? Who wrote the original? Who was the first spark? This is the Bootstrap Paradox. A concept so strange, so mind-bending, it seems to pull reality inside out. At its core, it's a paradox of origin, an object or idea that loops through time with no clear point of creation, no beginning, no end, just a circle, a book, a machine, a memory that exists only because it was passed through time by itself. The name bootstrap comes from the old phrase pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, a feat that sounds clever but is actually impossible, a metaphor for something that creates itself out of nothing. That's exactly what this paradox implies. Something that exists simply because it was sent backward and then forward again and again. The laws of cause and effect, completely tangled. Let's ground it in a classic story. A brilliant scientist invents a time machine. They step into it and travel back 20 years. They hand a folder of blueprints to their younger self. The instructions to build the machine. The younger version follows the plans perfectly, grows older, and eventually builds that same machine. and one day goes back in time to hand the blueprints to themselves again. So ask yourself, where did the blueprints come from? Not from invention, not from inspiration. Just a loop, an endless cycle with no clear origin. That's the Bootstrap Paradox. And it doesn't just break our understanding of time. It obliterates our assumptions about cause and effect. Because normally, we believe the world works in one direction. A cause happens. An effect follows. The present flows into the future. The past stays behind. But in the bootstrap loop, the future creates the past, and the past creates the future. Cause and effect blur until they are indistinguishable. That's why this paradox is so powerful and so unsettling. It challenges the very fabric of reality. It asks, can something exist without ever being created? Can information arise from nowhere, suspended in a timeless loop? And if so, what else might be caught in such a loop? It also raises profound philosophical questions. Is the scientist truly acting freely if the blueprint already exists? Is their future predetermined by something that has already happened, yet never began? Or does the paradox suggest something deeper, that free will exists outside of time altogether? In science fiction, this paradox shows up often and always leaves the audience stunned. In The Terminator, John Connor sends his protector back in time, only for that protector to become his own father, completing a loop where existence feeds itself. In The Time Traveler's Wife, a man keeps appearing in his wife's past before they've even met, locked in a closed circle where the future and past become one. But this isn't just fiction. Even science takes the Bootstrap Paradox seriously. In Einstein's theory of general relativity, there are mathematical solutions called closed time-like curves. In these models, space-time bends so much that it loops back on itself. If such loops are possible, then maybe the paradox isn't imaginary, but a real possibility woven into the cosmos. Still, the most haunting part of this paradox is not the time travel. It's the information. Imagine discovering a mathematical equation that changes everything, but it only exists because you learned it from the future. You pass it back and forward again. Where then did the idea come from? It was never created, never discovered, only recycled. This raises a galling question. Can something be real if it has no origin? Or are we merely trapped in the illusions of loops that feel real but never began? The implications stretch far beyond stories. They touch the nature of the universe itself. If time can bend, if information can echo back and forth, then perhaps the universe doesn't have a beginning at all. Perhaps the Big Bang was not at a starting point, but just one moment in an infinite cycle. A cosmic bootstrap. A universe that gives birth to itself. So, can the Bootstrap Paradox be solved? Not within the rules of linear time and logic as we understand them. It isn't a riddle to be answered. It's a mirror, a portal. It exists to shake us, to remind us that reality is stranger than we ever imagined. And that time, that most familiar of rivers, might not flow forward at all. It might spiral. It might fold. It might feed itself in ways our minds are only just beginning to grasp. The Bootstrap Paradox is a message, not from the past, not from the future, but from the unknown edge of what time could truly be. And it whispers, you do not yet understand, but one day you might. Imagine a small market square. Crowds gather as a merchant stands proudly on a wooden box. He raises a gleaming sword and proclaims, "This blade is so sharp it can slice through anything." Gasps ripple through the crowd. Eyes widen. Then he holds up a heavy bronze shield and declares, "And this shield is so strong, it can withstand any blow." Two perfect claims, two symbols of absolute power. But then a quiet voice from the crowd asks a simple question. What happens when your sword strikes your shield? The merchant pauses. His smile fades. The crowd grows silent. And in that moment, he realizes the trap he's set for himself. This is the sword and shield paradox, an ancient riddle, but one that still cuts deep into the fabric of logic and language. It's also known as the paradox of the irresistible force and the immovable object. Two absolutes, one impossible collision. The story has roots in ancient China, where it was told to highlight a contradiction hidden in confidence. One man claimed his sword could cut through anything. Another claimed his shield could block anything. But when both claims meet, something breaks. Not the sword, not the shield, but the very logic holding the claims together. At first glance, this seems like a riddle for children, a clever trick of words, but it's far more than that. It is a mirror reflecting the limits of absolutes. Because if the sword really can cut through anything, then no shield can stop it. And if the shield can block any attack, then no sword, however sharp, can pierce it. So what happens when both are claimed to be true? The answer is silence, the kind that speaks volumes. This paradox is a gentle but powerful reminder. Absolutes, though tempting, often crumble under the weight of contradiction. We will live in a world that loves absolutes. Politicians promise total safety. Ads shout us out perfect. People cling to certainty like a lifeline. This always works. That can never fail. But when two absolutes collide, the illusion dissolves. Take real-world conflicts. What happens when absolute freedom meets absolute security? Or when one's complete truth meets another's unwavering belief? These aren't just theories. They are the fault lines of modern society. The sword and shield paradox teaches us something essential. Truth often lives in the space between force and resistance, between certainty and doubt. In logic, contradictions break systems. A claim that denies itself cannot be true, just like the famous liar's paradox. This sentence is false. If it's true, then it must be false. And if it's false, then it must be true. In both cases, language becomes a loop. Logic turns in on itself and reason collapses. These aren't just linguistic puzzles. They are warnings. They show how easily our rules, our categories, can fail when pressed to their edges. Even in physics, this idea is used as a metaphor. If an irresistible force ever met an immovable object, one of them would have to yield, or reality would tear. But the universe doesn't allow such contradictions. That's the secret. No object is truly immovable. No force is truly irresistible, because absolutes, in nature, are illusions. And yet, in human behavior, we continue to chase them. We make claims. We build ideologies. We say things like, "This must always happen." That can never be questioned. But the paradox says, be careful, because every always meets a never, eventually. Even in personal life, this lesson echoes. We insist on being right. We cling to fixed ideas, but when life throws us something new, something unexpected, we often find that our shield isn't as strong as we thought, or our sword isn't sharp enough for this fight. The sword and shield paradox isn't about combat. It's about ideas. What happens when two perfect beliefs collide? Which one bends? Which one breaks? And what if neither can? That's when the contradiction tears through the logic itself. That's when we're forced to see the flaws in what once felt flawless. So, is there a solution to the paradox? Not within the world it creates. Not as long as both claims remain absolute. The only way out is to let go of one of the absolutes, or realize they were never truly absolute to begin with. This is why the paradox is so powerful. It doesn't give answers, it demands humility. It reminds us that language has limits, that logic, though sharp, can be dulled by contradiction, and that truth, real truth, rarely lives in the extremes. Instead, it hides in the gray areas, in nuance, in balance, in contradiction embraced, and that may be the most valuable sword of all. My nose will now grow. It sounds like a child's bluff, innocent, harmless, something whimsical, fit for fairy tales. But wait, pause for just a moment, ask yourself, will it grow? If it does grow, then Pinocchio must have been telling the truth. But if he was telling the truth, his nose shouldn't grow at all, because it only grows when he lies. But if it doesn't grow, then he must have been lying. And if he was lying, his nose should grow. We are trapped, spinning, looping, lost in a circle where both truth and falsehood tear into each other. This is not just a joke from a children's book. It is a philosophical bomb. It is known as the Pinocchio Paradox, and beneath its wooden surface lies a question that has haunted philosophers, linguists, and logicians for centuries. What is truth really? When truth refers to itself. Pinocchio's unique situation makes this paradox different. His fallacies are not invisible. They have consequences. Visible, measurable, physical consequences. A nose that stretches toward the sky each time deception leaves his lips. In a world of hidden motives and soft-spoken lies, his condition is almost refreshing. Until he says, "My nose will now grow." Because then we enter strange territory, a logical maze with no exit, a statement that eats itself from both ends. If he is telling the truth, his nose shouldn't grow. If he is lying, it should. But it can't be both. Or can it? The paradox he creates is a member of a larger family. The self-referential paradoxes, much like the famous, "This sentence is false." If the sentence is true, then it must be false. But if it's false, then it must be true. Round and round we go. But unlike that classic version, Pinocchio's statement is tied to action, to physical consequence, to a nose that will or won't grow, and that makes it even more mysterious. Let's break this down further. Pinocchio lives in a universe with a simple rule. Whenever he lies, his nose grows. This is clear, linear, predictable. But when he utters a self-referencing prediction, "My nose will now grow," he disrupts the order of that universe. Because now, the truth of the statement determines whether the action occurs, but the action also determines the truth of the statement. It's a loop, a mirror reflecting itself endlessly, and a logic, our precious stable tool for understanding the world, begins to crack. This paradox matters, not just in stories, but in philosophy, in mathematics, in psychology, and even in computer science. Because in every field where systems analyze themselves, self-reference can cause collapse. Take Kurt Gödel, for instance, one of the most brilliant minds in mathematical logic. In the early 20th century, he proved something astonishing: that any system complex enough to do basic arithmetic will contain statements that cannot be proven true or false within the system itself. His theorem shook the foundations of mathematics, and it lives in spirit within Pinocchio's words, a statement that logic can't fully absorb. Think about it. How do we decide what's true? Usually we look at evidence. We compare statements to reality. If someone says it's raining, we look outside. But what if the statement itself affects the outcome? What if speaking the sentence changes the truth behind it? In Pinocchio's case, that's exactly what happens. My nose will now grow. But is it a lie or a prophecy? The paradox exposes the fragility of language. It shows us that the structure we rely on to define our world can betray us when it turns inward. And this doesn't only apply to fairy tales. We have versions of the Pinocchio Paradox all around us. In law, when rules contradict each other. In programming, when a piece of code tries to debug itself. In psychology, when the mind tries to observe its own thoughts in real time. The result can be confusion, stagnation, contradiction. Even in daily life, we engage in these loops. We say things like, I always lie, or I know that I know nothing. These aren't just clever lines. They hint at the boundary between what can be said and what can be known. The Pinocchio Paradox also reveals something deeply human. Our tendency to get lost in our own heads. To analyze, overanalyze, and then analyze the analysis. Thoughts chasing thoughts. Certainty slipping through our fingers. Have you ever second-guessed yourself so many times that you no longer knew what you really believed? That's the Pinocchio Paradox, in emotional form. So, what can we learn from this? First, it's a reminder that not all questions are meant to be answered. Some exist to stretch the boundaries of thought. Second, it invites us to appreciate the delicate balance between truth and illusion. Even something as innocent as a sentence can contain infinite complexity if it dares to turn its gaze inward. And finally, it teaches humility, because no matter how clever we think we are, there will always be riddles that outwit us. In the end, the Pinocchio Paradox is not about puppets or fairy tales. It's about the structure of truth, the layers of meaning, the corners of language where logic blurs. So, the next time you hear him say, my nose will now grow, pause, smile, and remember, you've just stepped into a paradox that even the wisest minds have yet to escape. You're facing two treatment options for a serious illness. Treatment A shows a higher success rate overall. Naturally, you choose it, trusting the numbers. But then something strange happens. You break the data down into groups, younger patients, older patients. And in each group individually, treatment B actually performs better. How is that possible? How can something be better in every subgroup, yet worse overall? This is Simpson's paradox, a statistical illusion that turns logic inside out. It reveals how combining data can distort truth and lead even experts to false conclusions. At its heart, that Simpson's paradox occurs when a trend appears in multiple groups, but disappears or reverses when those groups are combined. It's not a trick. It's the math of misdirection. Let's make this real. Imagine a university reviewing its admissions data. It looks bad. Male applicants have a higher acceptance rate than female applicants overall. The conclusion? Possible gender bias. But when you look closer, break it down department by department, a new story unfolds. In every single department, women have a higher acceptance rate. How? Because women applied mostly to the most competitive departments with extremely low acceptance rates. Men applied more often to departments with higher rates of admission. So, while women performed better within each department, the departments themselves had the unequal levels of difficulty. That skewed the totals and twisted the truth. This is the core of Simpson's paradox. Aggregation hides nuance. The larger story can lie, even when all the smaller stories are true. And that it doesn't stop at admissions. In medicine, a drug might look effective overall, but when broken into age groups, it could show worse outcomes for every single group. In politics, aggregated voting data might suggest one trend, while individual communities vote the opposite. In business, a product might appear successful until you segment customers by region or income. Simpson's paradox teaches us that data isn't just about numbers, it's about context. Without context, we risk deception. With it, we see the deeper truth. But there's a harder question. When faced with conflicting patterns, overall versus subgroup, which do we trust? The truth is, both matter, but the right choice depends on your goal, your question, and your ethical compass. Simpson's paradox warns us, data can be weaponized. Without careful analysis, bad decisions get made. Policies fail, people suffer. So we must go deeper, ask better questions, challenge assumptions, and demand transparency. If someone shows you a statistic, ask, where's the breakdown? What's hidden beneath the surface? This paradox is more than a mathematical curiosity. It's a mirror, showing how fragile truth can be when reduced to averages. It forces us to see truth not as one answer, but as a landscape of perspectives, each shaped by the lens we choose. So next time you see a graph, a percentage, a headline, pause, look closer, and remember, what's true in parts can look false in whole, and what's false in whole might hide 1,000 hidden truths. You're standing at one side of a room. Your goal is simple, cross to the other side. But before you get there, you must reach the halfway point. And before that, the halfway of the halfway. And again, half of that. And again, and again. A strange realization sets in. You're now caught in an infinite sequence, a chain of halving steps that never seems to end. Each step is smaller than the last, but there's no final step. So how can you ever move at all? This isn't a trick. It's one of the oldest and most enduring thought experiments in history, Zeno's Dichotomy Paradox. First proposed by the Greek philosopher Zeno of Elea over 2,000 years ago, the paradox doesn't deny that motion happens. It simply questions how it happens. And what we find, beneath its surface simplicity, is a profound puzzle about time, motion, and the very fabric of space. Zeno's logic appears airtight. To move from point A to point B, you must complete an infinite number of smaller and smaller movements. But how can a finite journey consist of infinite steps? If it takes even a tiny amount of time for each step, how could you ever finish the process? At first glance, this seems absurd. We cross rooms, fields, oceans. We move all the time. So where's the flaw? It wasn't until centuries later that mathematicians found a way out. They discovered the concept of a converging infinite series. This is a sequence of numbers that, even though it goes on forever, adds up to a finite total, 1/2, 8 plus 1/16. The pattern continues infinitely, but the sum never exceeds 1. It approaches it, closing in tighter with each division. So, even though Zeno describes an infinite number of steps, the total distance and time involved can still be limited and complete. This insight resolved the paradox from a mathematical point of view, but it didn't erase the deeper philosophical questions. If we can divide space and time endlessly, what does that say about the true nature of the universe? Is reality continuous or made of discrete, indivisible units? Modern physics took this ancient puzzle and asked it again in a new light. Quantum mechanics tells us that there may be a smallest possible unit of space, the Planck length, and a smallest possible duration of time, the Planck time. Below these limits, space and time might lose meaning altogether. If this is true, then the infinite divisibility Zeno relied on doesn't actually exist. There's no halfway point after a certain scale, just the smallest step the universe can allow. Meanwhile, Einstein's theory of relativity reframes our understanding of motion. Space and time are not separate. They're interconnected, woven into a fabric we call space-time. And movement isn't about hopping from point to point. It's a relationship between observers, objects, and geometry. Zeno imagined the universe as a sequence of steps. Relativity paints it as a smooth continuum. Still, the Dichotomy Paradox continues to echo in philosophy, logic, and even cognitive science. It challenges how we think about infinity, about completion, about what it means to get somewhere. Even our thoughts, when broken down, might follow this same infinite regress, always chasing another reason, another step, another why. And so, the lesson of the Dichotomy Paradox isn't just about walking across a room. It's about what lies beneath the surface of the ordinary. It's a reminder that motion, time, and progress, things we take for granted, contain hidden layers of complexity. It invites us to look deeper, to pause in the middle of the hallway, and to wonder, is this journey made of infinite steps, or just one leap of understanding? Imagine having the power to travel through time. You step into a machine, select a date, decades in the past, and suddenly you're standing in a world long gone. Out of curiosity, or perhaps recklessness, you seek out your grandfather as a young man. But then, something goes wrong. Maybe you interrupt a meeting, change a decision, or simply delay a moment. And just like that, your grandfather never meets your grandmother. Your parent is never born. And by extension, neither are you, yet here you are. A contradiction walking through time, and this is the Grandfather Paradox. A mind-bending scenario that challenges everything we think we know about time, causality, and reality itself. If your very existence is amazed by your actions in the past, then how did you exist to take those actions in the first place? It's a loop with no exit, a cause without a stable effect, a self-canceling story. The Grandfather Paradox is more than a clever riddle. It's a powerful lens into the deepest puzzles of time travel and how we define possibility. At its heart, this paradox exposes a flaw in linear thinking. Cause leads to effect. Effect never reaches backward to rewrite its cause. And yet, if time travel were truly possible, the boundaries blur. You've become both the origin of change and the reason it cannot happen. Consider this. If you're able to go back and stop your grandfather from meeting your grandmother, then logically you should never have been born. But if you were never born, how could you go back in time to stop the meeting? The entire chain collapses. To escape this collapse, some theorists suggest a new path, alternate timelines. In this framework, the moment you alter something in the past, a new reality branches off. In that new branch, you no longer exist. But your original timeline remains untouched. You didn't erase yourself. You've just shifted into a different version of reality where you were never born. Others propose a different solution. Closed time-like curves. In these self-consistent loops, everything you do in the past has already happened. You're not changing history. You're fulfilling it. Even if you think you're disrupting your grandfather's life, your actions were already part of the timeline that led to your existence. No contradictions, no paradoxes, just a story that loops back on itself like a cosmic snake swallowing its tail. Still, both theories leave us with unsettling questions. Are we truly free in such a loop, or are our actions predetermined, locked in a cycle we cannot alter? Is time a river we can swim against, or a script we're doomed to follow? Physicists have long wrestled with the paradox. Einstein's theory of relativity allows for time dilation and strange warps in the fabric of space-time. In theory, it's possible to bend time enough to loop back, but theory isn't the same as reality. Many physicists argue that paradoxes like this reveal a fundamental block, some undiscovered rule that makes time travel to the past impossible. Others believe the universe allows time travel, but never allows contradictions. This is known as the Novikov self-consistency principle. In essence, whatever you do in the past, you cannot change the future you came from. Your choices are constrained by what has already happened. You have freedom, but only within the walls of fate. The grandfather paradox also stretches into philosophy. It challenges our concepts of free will and determinism. If you travel to the past, do you still have control, or are you merely a pawn in a script that has already written your role? And what about identity? If your existence depends on a fragile chain of moments, how solid is the self you think you are? Pop culture has embraced the paradox with open arms. Movies like Back to the Future, Looper, and The Terminator play with this very idea. Sometimes the paradox creates chaos. Other times it fuels redemption. Always it leaves us with a lingering question. If you could go back, should you? In the end, the grandfather paradox is not just a puzzle for scientists and philosophers. It's a mirror held up to our understanding of time, memory, and consequence. It dares us to imagine what happens when we untangle the threads of cause and effect. And it whispers a haunting truth. Every action we take ripples backward and forward, in ways we may never understand. A single grain of millet falls to the floor. Does it make a sound? You likely don't hear it. It's too faint, too subtle. But drop a handful, you'll hear it clearly. And if you drop a whole sack, it thunders. This ancient riddle is known as the grain of millet paradox, a puzzle that reaches far beyond sound. It asks us to explore the boundary between the imperceptible and the undeniable. It whispers one haunting question. When does nothing become something? The paradox, introduced by Zeno of Elea, challenges our assumptions about thresholds. It's not just about ears and out. It's about perception, measurement, and the mysterious transition from quantity to quality. If one grain is silent, and a million grains make noise, at what point does the sound begin? Where exactly is the dividing line between no sound and sound? And what does that say about how we experience the world? Let's begin with the basics. Our senses aren't infinite. They have limits. There are sounds too faint, lights too dim, touches too gentle. A single grain of millet might make a sound, but it slips below the threshold of our perception. Our ears don't register it. Does that mean the sound didn't exist? Or does reality continue, even when we can't detect it? This question reveals the true heart of the paradox. It's not about millet. It's about how we divide experience, how we set boundaries, and how we make judgments about what counts and what doesn't. This is the same problem behind the Sorites Paradox. At what point does a heap of sand become a heap? How many hairs must you lose before you are bald? Where is the tipping point? When does gradual become absolute? These aren't just abstract questions. They define how we interpret the world, how we classify, judge, and respond. The grain of millet paradox pulls us into this mystery by asking a quiet but profound question. What else are we missing just because it seems too small to matter? Think about habit. One workout doesn't make you fit. One day of writing doesn't make you an author, but do it again and again, day by day. And slowly, imperceptibly, you change. Then suddenly, someone says, "You've transformed." But the truth, the transformation began with the first silent grain. The paradox teaches us that change is often invisible when it begins, like water wearing down stone. like wind shaping dunes, like years changing a face. It also forces us to rethink impact. One person refusing a plastic straw won't save the oceans, but a bully in Pofel doing it? That's a tidal wave. That's noise, that's power. So when does the shift occur? When does one drop tip the bucket? No one can say. And that's what makes the paradox so maddening and so beautiful. In ethics, this has stunning implications. We are often tempted to say, my choice doesn't matter. It's too small to count. But that's the voice of someone who doesn't yet understand the grain of millet. One kind gesture, one vote, one recycled bottle. On their own, they're whispers. But together, they are a chorus, a force, a movement. In science, the same pattern appears. One cell doesn't make a body. One line of code doesn't build a program. One photon doesn't light the sky, but collect enough, and you get a heartbeat, a symphony, a sun. In quantum physics, particles act in ways so small and bizarre that we can't even see them directly. Yet their cumulative effects give rise to every object in existence, every thought, every universe. The paradox also nudges us toward humility. It reminds us that the world is far more complex than it appears, that our senses don't define what is real, that there's beauty and power in things too small to measure until they're not. So, what can we take away from this? First, don't underestimate small beginnings. Every movement starts with a murmur. Every mountain begins with a grain. Second, be aware of thresholds. Things don't change all at once. They shift layer by layer, and then suddenly everything is different. Third, rethink perception. Just because you can't hear it doesn't mean it isn't happening. And finally, trust in accumulation. Your daily choices, no matter how small, build the future. Quietly, relentlessly, unstoppably. So, the next time you feel like your effort is too minor to matter, remember the grain of Millet and listen closely, because somewhere in the silence, change is already beginning. Look up. Really look up. The night sky is scattered with stars, points of ancient light scattered across a sea of blackness. But here's a question that turns wonder into mystery. Why is the sky so dark? If the universe is infinite, eternal, and uniformly filled with stars, then shouldn't every direction you look land on the face of a star? Shouldn't the sky be ablaze, lit not by one sun, but by countless others stretching into infinity? This haunting contradiction is known as Olbers Paradox, named after the 19th century German astronomer Heinrich Wilhelm Olbers, though the idea existed long before he put his name to it. It challenges our most basic assumptions about space, light, and time. Let's explore it more deeply. Imagine standing in a dense forest, so dense that no matter where you turn, your vision eventually strikes the trunk of a tree. Now picture the universe as that forest, only instead of trees, there are stars. Everywhere. Forever. Shouldn't every line of sight eventually hit a star? And if it does, why doesn't the sky glow like the surface of the sun? Why the darkness? For centuries, thinkers wrestled with this. Some proposed that interstellar dust might be blocking the light from distant stars, but dust doesn't just absorb light. It also re-emits it once it heats up. So even if dust swallowed the starlight, it would eventually glow with the same intensity. That theory failed. Others thought that maybe distant stars are just too dim. Their light stretched too thin to reach us. But in an infinite universe, for every dim star there are more behind it. Countless more. Their combined glow should add up. Light from everywhere should overlap, layer upon layer, until the entire sky burns. Yet it doesn't. The solution to this cosmic riddle didn't come from astronomy alone. It came from a shift in how we understand the universe itself, from the birth of modern cosmology. Here's what we now know. The universe is not eternal. It had a beginning. 13.8 billion years ago. That's a hard limit. We call it the observable universe. Light travels at a finite speed, which means we can only see as far as light has had time to travel since the Big Bang. So, the stars beyond that cosmic horizon, their light hasn't reached us yet, and may never. That's one part of the answer. But there's another. The universe is expanding. And as it expands, the light from distant galaxies stretches. Its wavelengths pulled longer and longer like taffy. This effect is known as redshift. The farther away a galaxy is, the more its light is redshifted, eventually moving beyond visible light into infrared, then radio waves. Wavelengths we cannot see with the naked eye. So what looks like darkness may simply be invisible light. Together, these two revelations, a finite age and ongoing expansion, shatter the paradox. Olbers' mystery dissolves not because it was a foolish question, but because it was the right one, asked at the wrong time. And yet, it doesn't stop there. The darkness of the sky isn't just an absence, it's evidence. Proof that the universe had a beginning, that space is not static, that time is not infinite, that we are looking at a cosmic story still unfolding. In fact, the night sky glows faintly with the cosmic microwave background, the afterglow of the Big Bang itself. It's everywhere, even in the dark. We just need sensitive instruments to detect it. So, what seems like silence is actually an echo. What seems like blackness is actually a map. What seems like emptiness is full of time, energy, and invisible light. Olbers Paradox also offers a philosophical gift. It reminds us how often we're misled by appearance. We'd assume that darkness means emptiness, but sometimes it means boundaries. It means origins. It means mystery. It challenges us to ask better questions. Not just, what do I see, but what am I not seeing? In that sense, the paradox is a mirror. It shows us not just the structure of the universe, but the shape of our own ignorance. And here's another gift. The paradox shows how science works at its best. It didn't require better eyes. It required better minds. A change in thinking. A reimagining of time, distance, and light. It was solved not by one field, but by many. Astronomy, physics, relativity, cosmology. It's a triumph of interconnected knowledge. A reminder that the universe won't yield its secrets to one question alone, but to a chorus of disciplines singing together. And perhaps most beautiful of all, Olbers' Paradox makes the night sky more profound. That vast darkness above you, it's not a mistake. It's a message, a sign that we are finite beings in a finite age on the edge of something so immense, our senses can barely register it. The next time you look up, don't just search for stars. Look into the darkness, because in that darkness, you'll find the fingerprints of creation, the edges of time, and the silent glow of everything still waiting to be seen. Imagine someone tells you this. Looking at a green apple can prove that all ravens are black. You'd probably laugh. You might think they're joking, maybe even teasing your intelligence. But what if they're not? Welcome to the paradox of the raven, also known as Hempel's Paradox. One of the strangest, most thought-provoking puzzles in philosophy and logic. At first glance, it feels ridiculous. How can looking at a piece of fruit tell us anything about birds, let alone prove a sweeping claim about their color? And yet, this paradox holds a secret that shakes the very foundation of how we understand truth, logic, and evidence. Let's begin with a simple statement. All the ravens are black. In logic, that's equivalent to saying, if something is not black, then it is not a raven. Those two statements are logically identical. They mean exactly the same thing, just framed in reverse. Now, here's where the mind starts to twist. Every time you see a black raven, it supports the statement, all ravens are black. Makes sense. But if you see a green apple, something that is not black and not a raven, that observation, too, is technically evidence in favor of the statement. Yes, according to formal logic, seeing a green apple supports the idea that all ravens are black. This is the heart of the paradox, the contradiction between what logic says and what common sense feels. Our intuition screams, that apple has nothing to do with ravens. But formal reasoning says otherwise. Let's break this down more carefully. Suppose you're a scientist trying to prove all ravens are black. You go out into the field. You find one black raven, then another, and another. Each one supports your hypothesis, but under the logic of contrapositive reasoning, anything that confirms the idea, if it's not black, then it's not a raven, also supports all ravens are black. So, when you pick up a green apple, your brain isn't connecting it to birds, but logically, it fits the pattern. It is not black. It is not a raven. Therefore, it supports the inverse logic of your original claim. Still feels off, doesn't it? And that's the brilliance of the paradox. It reveals a deep disconnect between logic and intuition. We don't experience all forms of evidence equally. Seeing a black raven feels direct, relevant, and strong. Seeing a green apple feels irrelevant, random, or trivial. Even though both technically support the claim, we weight them differently in our minds. Why? Because we instinctively measure relevance, causality, and informational value, things formal logic doesn't account for. And that opens a deeper conversation. What really counts as evidence? Is every supporting example equal? Should we treat all confirmations with the same weight? And how do our cognitive biases shape what we think counts? The paradox of the raven exposes something fragile in how we think. That certainty, logic, and understanding are not always aligned. In scientific terms, this links to the problem of induction, how we generalize from specific observations to broad claims. It also connects to Bayesian reasoning, where we update probabilities based on how likely or surprising each new piece of evidence is. A green apple isn't very surprising. It doesn't challenge our expectations, so we don't assign it much weight. But a white raven? Now that would shatter the rule. Just one white raven would disprove the entire claim. So, while thousands of black ravens build confidence, a single counterexample can destroy the idea completely. That's the asymmetry of truth, and the paradox reminds us just how precarious our certainty can be. It also shines a light on the limits of pure logic. Logic gives us clarity, but not always insight. It offers precision, but not always relevance. It tells us what follows, but not what matters. And perhaps that's the true gift of the paradox. It teaches us to think about thinking, to pause and question. Why do we believe what we believe? What hidden assumptions shape our trust in evidence? How often do we dismiss something important just because it seems unrelated? In a way, the paradox is more than just a logical puzzle. It's a mirror. It shows us the human side of reasoning, the messy, intuitive, sometimes irrational part that logic textbooks don't always capture. So, what's the takeaway? First, understand that not all evidence is created equal in our minds, and we should be aware of that bias. Second, embrace the idea that even strange, indirect connections may hold truth. And third, use paradoxes not to confuse, but to awaken new layers of insight. Because sometimes it takes a green apple to understand a black raven, and sometimes the path to truth is more twisted and more beautiful than we ever imagined. What if the key to enduring suffering wasn't hope alone? What if it was the marriage of two seemingly opposite forces, unshakable faith and brutal honesty? This is the essence of the Stockdale Paradox, a lesson born not from theory or books, but from the heart of human darkness, the prison camps of the Vietnam War. Named after Admiral James Stockdale, a U.S. Navy officer who spent 8 excruciating years as a prisoner of war. This paradox holds a truth that reshapes our understanding of strength, resilience, and survival itself. Stockdale wasn't just imprisoned, he was tortured, isolated, deprived of any certainty. And yet, he survived. When asked how, his answer didn't speak of hope in the usual sense. In fact, he said something shocking. The optimists were the ones who didn't make it. What did he mean by that? The ones who believed they'd be out by Christmas, and then Easter and then Thanksgiving, were slowly crushed each time their predictions failed. They died, he said, not because they were weak, but because they clung to false deadlines and were devastated when each one passed unmet. Stockdale did something radically different. He chose to believe with absolute conviction that he would prevail, but at the same time, he faced the full horror of his circumstances without flinching. This is the paradox. To survive the worst, you must believe you will endure, while also accepting fully how bad it really is. This isn't blind optimism. It's a conscious, disciplined mindset. Hope without illusion, faith without denial. And it's more than just a wartime strategy. It's a blueprint for navigating any adversity, loss, illness, failure, crisis. Any moment when life breaks your plans and dares you to keep going. So let's break this down. On one side of the paradox is hope. Not the sugary, empty kind, but a deep, anchored belief in your own ability to outlast the storm. On the other side is brutal realism. The ability to stare your pain in the face, to acknowledge your limits, to name your fears and your facts. Together, they create an emotional engine powerful enough to carry you through anything. Because if you lean only on hope, you'll be shattered by disappointment. And if you focus only on the brutal facts, you'll be buried in despair. It's the balance that keeps you alive. And this balance isn't just theoretical. In psychology, it's called adaptive resilience. In leadership, it's called crisis wisdom. In life, it's called growing through suffering rather than collapsing under it. Consider how this applies outside the battlefield. In a failing relationship, blind hope might make you ignore deep problems. Cold realism might lead you to give up too soon. But the Stockdale mindset, it helps you see the cracks clearly and still believe in the possibility of repair. In business, a struggling project might tempt you toward false positivity. We'll fix it next week, or total surrender. It's doomed. But the Stockdale Paradox urges a third path. Face the data, grapple with the hard truths, and still say, we're not finished yet. Even during a personal crisis, a health scare, a loss, a financial blow, the paradox offers a way forward. Not through fantasy, not through despair, but through courage grounded in truth. And that's what makes it so powerful. Because the Stockdale Paradox is not just about surviving the moment, it's about emerging transformed. Stockdale didn't just return from captivity. He returned with wisdom, humility, and purpose. He found meaning in the pain, and that meaning gave shape to the suffering, turned it into something endurable, even valuable. That's the deeper invitation of this paradox. Not just to hold on, but to hold on with clarity, to suffer without self-deception, to hurt without losing hope. To endure, not blindly, but consciously. And yes, it's hard. Yes, it requires emotional discipline. But it's also what transforms a victim into a survivor, and a survivor into a guide for others. So, how do we live this paradox in our daily lives? We begin with radical honesty. No sugarcoating, no pretending. Just the courage to look at our lives as they really are. Then we add radical faith. The quiet conviction that no matter how dark it gets, there is something in us that can survive, something that can adapt, grow, even thrive. We learn to let hope and grief sit side by side, to let pain and possibility share the same breath, because resilience isn't denial, it's devotion to the truth and to the belief that we're not done yet. And perhaps that's the real lesson here, that the human spirit, when tempered by truth and lifted by belief, can withstand almost anything. So when the storm comes, don't just hope for sunshine. Grab onto the mast, face the waves, and whisper, "I will prevail, and I will not lie to myself about how hard this will be." That's the paradox. That's the power. And that's how you make it through. Picture this. You're holding a small, ordinary card. On one side, it reads, "The statement on the other side of this card is true." You flip it over. It says, "The statement on the other side of this card is false." It seems harmless at first, a curious little riddle, until you stop and really try to resolve it. And that's when it begins, the unraveling. Because if one side is true, the other must also be true. But then it must be false. And then the first becomes false too, which makes the second true again. And you're trapped. Welcome to the Sorites Paradox, a self-referential loop that fractures logic and invites you into the strange territory where truth collapses in on itself. This isn't just a brain teaser. It's a philosophical detonator, revealing how fragile our understanding of logic can be when it turns inward, when statements begin to feed on themselves. Let's break it down. This paradox belongs to a family known as self-reference paradoxes. Each one involves statements that refer back to themselves, creating loops that defy clear resolution. The card paradox is a two-part version of the more famous liar's paradox, which says simply, "This sentence is false. If it's true, it must be false. But if it's false, then it must be true." It's like trying to hold a mirror up to another mirror. What you get is infinite reflection and no clear answer. With the card paradox, the mirror becomes even more twisted. Each side tries to anchor the other, but both anchors float in midair. Why does this matter? Because this silly-sounding loop cracks open something profound: the limitations of logic, language, and even the human mind. Let's go deeper. In formal logic, there's a principle called the law of the excluded middle. Every statement must be either true or false. But paradoxes like this one shatter that rule. They create a zone where neither truth nor falsehood can safely live. It's not just about logic breaking down. It's about our deepest assumption, that the world can be neatly categorized into yes or no, right or wrong, black or white, proving itself wrong. Enter Kurt Gödel, a 20th century mathematician who proved something astonishing. No logical system can be both complete and consistent. In other words, if a system is strong enough to be useful, it will contain truth that cannot be proven, and in contradictions it cannot resolve. This is not just math, it's the architecture of uncertainty. The card paradox is like a playful version of Gödel's insight. It uses language instead of equations, but the message is the same. Truth has edges we can't always define. It also exposes how fragile language itself can be. We think of words as tools for clarity, but they can just as easily lead us into confusion. When a sentence talks about itself, when it loops inward, it creates something we can't untangle, a kind of linguistic black hole. And that too has deep implications, because in the real world, we rely on self-reference all the time. We say things like, "I'm lying." This rule applies to all rules. This document supersedes all others, including itself. And yet, at the core of those structures lurks the same instability as the card. But the significance doesn't end in logic or language. It touches something psychological too. Humans are uncomfortable with uncertainty. We want closure, resolution, truth we can hold in our hands. The card paradox refuses to give us that. It leaves us in limbo, forcing us to sit with ambiguity. That might seem unsettling, but it's also liberating, because it shows us that not all contradictions are problems to be solved. Some are truths to be honored. Some are invitations to expand our minds. The paradox doesn't want to frustrate you. It wants to free you, to break the habit of binary thinking, to open a door to complexity, to show that logic, while powerful, has its own blind spots. And that's a lesson we can carry beyond philosophy. In relationships, in politics, in identity, we often demand clear answers, but the world is rarely that simple. Sometimes embracing the tension is the wisest thing we can do. So next time you see a card with 2 sentences, don't dismiss it as a trick. See it for what it truly is, a portal to deeper thought, a mirror that reflects not truth, but the limits of our ability to define it. And maybe that's the point, not to find the answer, but to recognize that some truths live in the in-between, and to learn how to stand there quietly without needing to resolve what was never meant to be resolved. Imagine you're managing a wildlife reserve. You notice the prey population is struggling. Perhaps it's the rabbits, the deer, or the antelope. So, with the best of intentions, you enrich their habitat. You provide more food, make the terrain safer, reduce threats, and create ideal conditions for their growth. And it works. At first, the prey population surges, healthy, fast breeding, and abundant, which sounds like a success. But then, the predators follow. Their numbers rise sharply. They thrive on the abundance and begin hunting the prey faster than they can reproduce. The system collapses, not slowly, but catastrophically. This is the paradox of enrichment, a devastating reminder that more is not always better. First proposed by ecologist Michael Rosenzweig in 1971, this paradox challenges our assumptions about improvement, intervention, and the hidden fragility of complex systems. At its core, the paradox of enrichment is simple. Too much support for one part of a system can destroy the whole. Let's break it down. In a stable predator-prey relationship, each population regulates the other. When prey numbers grow, predator numbers grow in response. When predators overconsume, prey numbers fall, and predators in turn decline. But if you enrich the environment, offering endless food for prey, the prey population grows beyond its natural rhythm. This sudden spike leads to a parallel boom in predators. And predators don't regulate themselves. They eat and eat until there's nothing left. And then they collapse too, from abundance to extinction, caused by too much help. But this ecological tale is more than a lesson about rabbits and foxes. It's a universal metaphor about how we treat systems, from economies to relationships to our own inner lives. Take economics. A government floods the market with money, subsidies, or incentives. Short-term boom, people spend, markets grow, but what comes next? Inflation, debt, resource exhaustion. The system that was supposed to thrive begins to strain under the weight of too much. Or look at parenting. You want your child to succeed, so you give them every tool, every reward, every ounce of praise. But over time, the child becomes dependent on validation, resistant to failure, afraid to try without a guaranteed win. What began as love becomes a trap of overindulgence. The same happens in work. Give too many perks, too much comfort, too little challenge, and performance declines, not improves, because friction, effort, and balance are part of growth. We see it in our own emotional lives. If you remove all discomfort, shield yourself from every sadness, distract from every anxiety, you weaken the very resilience you need to endure the world. In trying to avoid pain, you forget how to hold it. You forget how to grow through it. This paradox teaches us something profound. Stability isn't created by excess, but by balance. There is a hidden wisdom and restraint in allowing systems to find their own limits, in understanding that more can quickly become too much. So, how do we live with this insight? First, by shifting from control to stewardship. Not everything needs to be fixed or boosted. Sometimes the role of a wise guardian is simply to protect the conditions where balance can unfold on its own. Second, by honoring complexity. Every system, natural, social, emotional, is full of interwoven threads. Change one, and you tug on 10 others. Intervention without understanding is like throwing seeds into the wind and expecting only flowers to grow. Third, by embracing humility. The desire to improve things is noble, but when it becomes arrogant, it can blind us to the consequences of our own actions. Enrichment isn't bad, but enrichment without foresight becomes danger disguised as generosity. That's the essence of the paradox. You give more, but get less. You nourish, but end up starving the system. You act from care and cause collapse. So, the paradox of enrichment is not a rejection of growth or kindness. It is a call to wisdom, a reminder that health is not found in expansion, but in equilibrium. Whether you're guiding a child, managing a business, healing a community, or tending to your own soul, know the tipping point between enough and too much. Because just like an overfed forest can burn hotter when a fire comes, a system grown too lush can collapse faster when tested. And that's the haunting truth this paradox leaves us with. Even good intentions can be seeds of ruin, if not grounded in deep awareness, if not restrained by the wisdom of limits. In the end, true enrichment isn't about giving more. It's about knowing when not to. You walk into a restaurant, hungry and tired. You place your order looking forward to a comforting meal, but when the plate arrives, it's completely wrong. Wrong dish, wrong ingredients, wrong everything. Frustration rises. You feel let down. But then something unexpected happens. The waiter rushes over full of apologies. The manager steps in, sincerely acknowledging the error. They quickly prepare the correct meal, beautifully presented. They bring a complimentary dessert and hand you a voucher for your next visit. And now, that one negative experience becomes the most memorable part of your day. Not because of the failure, but because of how it was handled. This is the service recovery paradox. It's the strange idea that a well-handled mistake can make customers even more loyal than if nothing had gone wrong at all. In other words, failure, if handled exceptionally, can create deeper trust than flawless performance. That doesn't mean companies should aim to fail, but it means that when they inevitably do, there's a hidden opportunity to turn the situation around in a powerful way. Let's unpack why this paradox works. At its heart, the service recovery paradox involves two emotional moments. First, the customer's disappointment when things go wrong. Second, the company's response. If that second moment, the recovery, is handled with care, speed, and generosity, it often generates an emotional lift that exceeds even normal satisfaction. Why? Because of human psychology. When something fails, our expectations drop. We brace ourselves for excuses, apathy, or delays. But if instead we're met with empathy, action, and overcompensation, it surprises us. It flips the emotional script. That surprise creates delight, and a delight creates fulfillment. Take another example. You book a hotel room. When you arrive, it's not ready. That's annoying. But then, they upgrade you to a luxurious suite, offer you free drinks at the bar, and check in with you throughout your stay to make sure everything else is perfect. Now, not only do you forgive the mistake, you become a fan. You want to come back. This is the power of great recovery. But here's the catch. The paradox only works if the recovery is exceptional. A half-hearted apology won't cut it, and the same customer won't forgive repeated failures, no matter how well they're fixed. The service recovery paradox relies on rarity, a mistake that feels like an exception, not a pattern, a failure that becomes a showcase for a company's true character. But let's go deeper. Why does this work beyond expectations? Part of the answer lies in trust. Trust isn't just built through consistency. It's built through how we handle disruption. When someone disappoints us, then steps up to make it right, that's powerful. It shows integrity. It shows we matter. It shows resilience. And in relationships, business or personal, resilience is what creates depth. There's also a hidden principle at work here: reciprocity. When someone goes out of their way for us, we feel an instinct to give something back. In business, that might mean a positive review, a return visit, or a word-of-mouth recommendation. In life, it might mean forgiveness or gratitude. The service recovery paradox, then, isn't just about fixing what's broken. It's about turning tension into connection, mistake into meaning. But let's be clear. This paradox doesn't give permission to slack on quality. If companies start making mistakes on purpose, hoping to wow customers with their apologies, they'll lose trust. This only works when the failure is genuine and the recovery is heartfelt and skillful. So, how can businesses apply this wisely? First, train your frontline people. Empower them to solve problems on the spot. Don't bog them down with layers of approval. Give them the tools, the language, and the confidence to act fast and sincerely. Second, don't underestimate the emotional weight of a problem. Sometimes a simple "we're truly sorry" spoken with genuine care means more than any refund. Sometimes a handwritten note does more than a discount code. Third, act fast. Speed matters. Silence or delay sends a message. We don't care. But a quick, thoughtful response says, "We see you, we hear you, we want to make this right." The service recovery paradox reminds us of a bigger truth. In life, just like in business, people don't expect perfection, but they do expect humanity. They expect honesty, effort, and follow-through. And when we deliver those things during a moment of disappointment, that's when we earn real trust. So, the next time something goes wrong, don't panic, don't disappear, and don't just offer a coupon. Offer care, offer clarity, offer connection. Because a mistake, handled well, might just be the best opportunity you'll ever have to turn a stranger into a loyal friend. And that's not just good business. That's a paradox worth embracing. It sounds like science fiction, a tale pulled from the pages of a cosmic dream. But it's not. It's a paradox born from physics, one that Einstein himself introduced, and it challenges something we take for granted every single day: time. This is the twin paradox, a riddle that asks what happens when two people, identical in every way, begin to age at different speeds. Let's begin at the surface. Imagine with two identical twins. They share the same birth date, the same DNA, the same start in life. But then, one of them boards a spacecraft that travels at near light speed, while the other stays behind here on Earth. The traveling twin races through space for what feels like a few years. Eventually, they return home, expecting to reunite with the sibling they left behind. But something strange has happened. The twin on Earth has grown old, wrinkled skin, gray hair, the weight of decades, while the spacefaring twin has barely aged. The two were once the same, but now they are years, perhaps decades, apart. How is this possible? The answer lies in one of the most profound theories ever proposed: Einstein's theory of special relativity. According to relativity, time is not fixed. It is not some universal clock ticking away at the same rate for everyone. Time is fluid, elastic, dependent on motion. The faster you move through space, the slower you move through time. From the perspective of someone watching you, this phenomenon is called time dilation, and it means that for the twin moving at near light speed, the clock inside their ship ticks slower compared to the one on Earth. Their heart beats slower. Their thoughts stretch out longer. Their aging slows down. This isn't speculation. It's been tested, proven, measured. Atomic clocks flown on airplanes have returned ticking behind their stationary counterparts. Particles called muons, normally short-lived, survive longer when accelerated to near light speed. Satellites orbiting the Earth must correct their time constantly, because at those velocities and altitudes, time passes differently than it does on the ground. Without those corrections, your GPS wouldn't work. Your phone would get you lost. Your maps would be wrong. Time dilation is real, and the twin paradox reveals its most personal version. But it raises a troubling question. If all motion is relative, why can't the traveling twin argue that they were standing still, and it was the Earth that moved away? Why does only one twin age more slowly? The answer lies in asymmetry. The twin who travels leaves one frame of reference, accelerates into another, then decelerates, turns around and accelerates back. They change direction. They feel the pull of engines. They experience acceleration. That difference, that physical experience of switching frames, breaks the symmetry between the two paths. The earthbound twin remains in an inertial frame, never feeling that same disruption. So, the paradox is resolved not through magic, but through motion. And yet the implications go far beyond equations. Because if time can pass differently for two people, what is time really? Is it a fixed thread we all follow together? Or is it something personal, shaped by movement, gravity, perspective? The twin paradox breaks open the doors to deep philosophical questions. If one brother can age while the other barely does, what does that mean for memory, for love, for relationships? Could we one day say goodbye to someone we love, travel near light speed for a short journey, and return to find them aged, changed, perhaps even gone? And if so, what kind of emotional cost would that carry? What kind of loneliness comes with becoming a traveler between decades, while your loved ones live in slow motion behind you? This is where science touches soul, because time is not just a number. It's the medium in which we live, age, love, regret, hope. To stretch time is to stretch identity. To compress time is to rewrite the meaning of aging itself. The twin paradox reminds us of how limited our human intuition truly is. We evolved in a world of slow speeds, where time seemed reliable, a constant rhythm from birth to death. But the universe plays by different rules. In the realm of relativity, your experience of time depends on your path through space-time, and not all paths are equal. This paradox also reshapes how we imagine the future. Interstellar travel once seemed impossible, but now we know, if we could move fast enough, we could travel to distant stars within a human lifetime, even if centuries pass back home. It's a possibility both thrilling and tragic. We could reach new worlds, but we might return to a world no longer ours. The twin paradox is not about paradox alone. It's about the cost of moving through time in a different rhythm, about how physics can fracture identity, how motion can twist memory, how love and loss might look in a relativistic world. It's a reminder that even the most familiar things, like the ticking of a clock, can become strangers when viewed through the lens of deeper truth. So, the next time you glance at the time, remember that it may not be the same for everyone, that even a second, even a moment, can stretch, bend, and warp, depending on how fast you move through the cosmos. The twin paradox isn't just physics. It's a poem written in motion, a warning, and an invitation to imagine what time truly is, when you stop pretending it ever worked the way we thought it did. You buy a ticket, a single piece of paper, 1 in 10 million. The odds, astronomical. The chance of losing, overwhelming. And yet, you feel it. That subtle flutter in your chest. That irrational little whisper. What if? You know the truth. You've heard it, you've read it. You've even repeated it to others. The odds are impossible. But still you hope. This is the lottery paradox, a strange and powerful contradiction between what we know logically and what we feel emotionally. It begins with something simple. A person buys a lottery ticket. Rationally, they understand their odds. They know the probability of winning is minuscule, just 1 in 10 million. And yet, they believe they might win. Not someone might win. They might. Now imagine this belief multiplied by millions of ticket holders, each one thinking they could be the lucky one. But of course, almost all of them will lose. Only one will win. And yet somehow they all carry within them a quiet, personal conviction that their number might just be the one. That's the heart of the paradox. A massive group of people all believing they will win, when nearly every one of them is destined to lose. It's a clash between the cold machinery of probability and the warmth of human hope. Let's take a closer look. Statistically speaking, if 10 million tickets are sold and only one wins, each individual has a 1% chance of success, almost nothing. And yet, the person holding the ticket rarely thinks about the collective odds. They don't imagine the other 99 people also hoping, also dreaming. Instead, they zero in on their single moment of potential. This disconnect between subjective belief and objective reality is what gives the lottery paradox its peculiar power. Subjective belief is personal, emotional, shaped by dreams, investment, and identity. Objective probability is mathematical, cold, indifferent to feelings. And when the two meet, paradox arises. Each ticket holder behaves as if their belief is reasonable, even rational. But when all these beliefs are stacked together, a contradiction forms. Millions believe they might win, but only one can. So, are they irrational, deluded? Not necessarily. Enter psychology. More specifically, optimism bias. This cognitive bias leads people to believe they are more likely than others to experience good outcomes, even when the evidence says otherwise. In the context of a lottery, optimism bias fuels that tiny ember of hope. It allows people to believe despite the numbers. But this paradox isn't limited to scratch cards and lottery draws. It speaks to something much deeper, something woven into our decisions, our investments, our risks, our lives. People gamble on businesses. They put money into high-risk stocks. They chase unlikely romances. They fight against terminal diagnoses, all with odds that may be no better than 1 in a million. And yet, they believe. Because we are not machines. We do not run on pure logic. We run on emotion, experience, and narrative. A lottery ticket isn't just a number. It's a story, a possibility, a path out of hardship, a chance to change everything. Hope isn't blind. It's defiant. And sometimes, it's all a person has. This is why the lottery paradox matters, because it's not just about probability. It's about what happens when human belief collides with mathematical certainty. In economics and decision theory, rational agents are assumed to behave based on facts and logic. But we are not those agents. Not entirely. We are storytellers, dreamers, gamblers of the soul, and that has consequences. In how we vote, how we save money, how we diagnose illness, how we interpret miracles. Even in science, belief can distort interpretation. Even in medicine, patients believe they'll beat the odds. Even in relationships, we cling to chances long after they've faded. This isn't always bad. Hope gives people strength. It fuels risk-taking, exploration, and persistence. Without it, no one would play the lottery, and no one would try to reach the stars. But the lottery paradox reminds us to balance belief with awareness, to understand the odds, but not be ruled by them. Because even when the numbers say no, the human spirit might still whisper yes. In the end, the paradox is this. Our minds can hold two opposing truths. I will probably lose, but maybe, just maybe, I won't. This tension between rational doubt and irrational hope isn't a flaw. It's the essence of being human. And that is the final paradox.